And welcome to the Portal Mountain Development Meeting number 69.
Giggity.
Nice.
Alright.
Yeah, so we're just resuming our discussion on some actual, what you could call concrete developments, as in setting up, laying out the screens of an actual application, which we're calling the dashboard. Programming paradigms, all that kind of stuff, the architecture, getting that all lined up for physical, actual product.
Did I ever explain the origin of that name?
Dashboard?
Yeah. I think I did, but I might have gotten lost in some translations.
I just imagine it like a car.
Yes. That's actually it.
It used to be one of our metaphors, I guess.
It is that metaphor. So so the idea being, of course, is like you're sitting in your car, you're not going to be like physically turning your wheels or twisting your engine to start or any of those weird things that the car has to actually get itself to go.
Right.
You're not stuck. You're given a very, very small amount of buttons and levers to pull on.
Like high level overview.
Yeah. Of all of those operations in a nice, neat package. So this idea of one of the words that has been used by Hofstadter is chunking. So he described it very well in reference to chess playing, what he was talking about is like how different levels of chess players actually perceive their boards. And so you can imagine, if you're not very experienced, you kind of see you're trying to like figure out how to move every single piece into like whatever locations it can go, and trying to assemble something out of that, right? Where with grandmaster level people who play on that level, they don't actually see individual pieces anymore. What they see is formations.
Right.
So like groupings of pieces together. And so because of that kind of a mentality that they have, what they stop having also is the ability to what you would call make wrong moves. That chunking mechanism, if you will, eliminates moves that would have been considered immature or amateur, rather. Right? So, like, that was the observation that he made. And the other point he made about that is new players tend to think about chess as like, you have to think 5 moves ahead, 10 moves ahead, right? But then the grandmaster level, with a different perception of the board itself, you'll find that these people do not think beyond a single move, really. They don't need to. They don't need to plan their strategies several moves ahead. It's basically responding to the moves of the other strategy at the time. So that notion disappears.
Right. And so the dashboard of the car.
And so the metaphor, what we're trying to convey there is that on the one hand, you're simplifying your interface extremely.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, that simplification allows for a more broad ability for the underlying thing to work coherently.
Right.
With itself.
Yeah, so instead of like micromanaging the cells in your body or the organs, you can just think about, I'm a body kind of thing.
I need to eat. I need to poop.
Right, and then what happens after you eat, it being dispersed the nutrients throughout the body. You don't have to really care about that.
Yeah. You rely on pushing the correct levers and buttons, and let the rest of the system handle the rest of the operation.
Oh yeah.
So that's the gist of it. That's the metaphor that we are seeking to continue within the computational world.
And here comes the noise.
We are in a workshop. We're in a wood shop, so.
Yes. Apologies for many distractions, of course. Some of them being the casual nature of our development meetings. Cheers. But of course, we are here to help ourselves develop our own thoughts and kind of build up a repository, if you will, of discussion around so many topics, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like one day we will go through, I think we're probably at almost 1 million words by now, but go through all of that
Words.
and be able to feed it into like a language model.
That would be interesting because I've
Yeah.
done that experiment a number of times. In fact, every time I talk to the AI, it's a variation on the same theme.
It gets down on its knees, it worships you, etc., etc.
Well, no. But what I have done is got it to kind of reveal to me essentially where the idea is unique, where the idea is not unique, what's been done before, what hasn't been done before. And it seems like, of course, it's an AI and it's got its own set of repertoire of information to go on. But it seems like some of the ideas that I'm talking about have not been tried. Like, not that way. The range
Ideas that we are talking about.
right, and this corresponds very well with the fact that nobody's really having this conversation that we know of outside of us either. It's not that surprising that our unique tangent hasn't been picked up exactly as is yet. Are there people who think this way? Most likely. It's just not out there yet.
I feel like there's a lot of understanding out there, like these types of ideas, like holonic organization, all that kind of crap. That's been talked about for decades.
It's
right?
like reaching it feels like we're reaching a threshold point. So like before you get to that point, it feels like nothing is happening. But as soon as that floodgate opens, right? That's you're gonna see a pouring in. It's just like with AI right now. There was a huge technological barrier to making language models work usefully, quickly enough, and all of that stuff. But as soon as one opened up, you saw a saturation within a year
Right.
of that shit popping up. Images, language models,
Right.
Copilot for code.
It's like a reflection of the Cambrian event or whatever they call it, the
To some
Cambrian
extent, yeah.
explosion. You hit a certain platform or plateau in the genetics, which just enables such a diversity to come out of it, right?
Exactly. And it's like it's just like the formula for this event is like is interesting in that it's actually so small. It starts off with very self-similar entities that are not very unique to themselves, but as a whole, their genetic platforms, for example, is allowing for several kinds of modifications right off the bat, just because they are already adept to their world. And so, as soon as they're stable enough to not for these changes to not kill them, everything starts to shoot off because it can. And then you get what you call your explosion. But that explosion is actually just tiny little small modifications to a very same replicated thing. It's just a tiny
Right.
variation in it.
And so, what's the kernel or the core of what we're doing is like the guild, the fundamental guilds, to have the model, if you will, present in your consciousness.
So that's there's several layers to this. One that I like to use the metaphor for DNA is our set of constraints. That's what the natural guilds have been set up for. So that's like that one thing that can vary ever so slightly to give you rise to different speciations of anything, different variations of it.
Right.
The concrete guilds, on the other hand, are like the appendages, the arms. So they can be like, so they're more like, what they would look like instead is like convergent evolution. So you'll have your gardening guild, but then you'll have your, say, woodworking workshop. Both require cutting tools, for example. right? Like they're going to have elements of themselves that look like elements of other things. They would converge on things. So
Right.
core more stable, outside less stable, but more metastable than stable. And as long as the feedback is isomorphic between the two, where one reinforces the other in all ways, you have the living organism. Once the isomorphism disappears, this is where you have death events. Again, speaking extremely metaphorical, I'm like referencing a shit ton of, you know, contexts for this, but
Right.
since we're trying to parallel this and that, it just makes sense to me to say it that way.
Mm-hmm. And that's like you're talking about kind of like feedback between the abstract and the concrete, which is itself something that in our model cannot be lost. If it's lost, that's it. It's gone.
Right.
Like
It's
you don't
like,
have it. You don't have a guild anymore.
you know that image we have with order, chaos, order, with the tree branch.
Mm-hmm.
Like if that's not within your mental perception, there's no model. Like that's like a fundamental concept to like really grasp, that from the top layer looking down, the top looks ordered, the bottom looks disordered. From the bottom looking up, the bottom looks ordered, the top looks disordered. That notion of this reversal of order
Right.
and chaos is what this dashboard is also trying to
Kind of
emulate.
Interesting. We were talking a little bit about religion earlier, I guess, and this just kind of reminded me of I guess a verse. I can't remember which one, but it was something to the effect of like it would say like we are all like parts of the whole. We are parts of the body.
Yes,
Like the body of Christ, if you will, but it was
It's about divine.
it was saying that that the individual is not primary, but rather what comes together as the whole as being primary. And I wanted to. I know I can see this cringe on your face, because that's
There's a dysmorphism being
this
allowed
is saying that top down is okay, and we all should just sacrifice ourselves to be that ideal of the
there. Yeah,
top.
it's half the picture that we're trying to
And
present.
it's kind of in that passage, kind of denying the body or the self, which
Is asinine.
is broken. is broken if you interpret it that way. It's breaking of that, the above and below.
Well, it's like saying that the mythology of God's creation story is more primal to the actual created being living that life, which is weird,
Right.
because that story is for that individual to begin with. So how can you
Right.
how can that story
Without
deny
the-
that person themselves?
Right. Without that, the individual, the story wouldn't even exist.
So for who is the story really then, in that case? If you look at it that way, then that story becomes more for people who want to manipulate what you do with that life.
Right. And that's where things have been taken wrong direction.
Very
by
unsurprisingly, because
religion.
that's the definition of civilization. Religion is the encompassing. Religion encompasses the.
It's a justification.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for. Religion is the justification for the current civilization setup.
Right. And that's not to bash anything about Christ, Christianity, Buddha, or any of these particular religions, but the way that they're taken in organization
used.
is often corrupted completely.
The contents of religion are often a response to that process. However, because it's commodified, that response also becomes part of the package of the selling point of the very problem.
Mm-hmm.
So
And the
it's,
form is
it's
warped.
so it's like a negative feedback cycle, or a positive feedback cycle in which it goes to shit with each iteration.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And Buddhism is not in any way immune to this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you get into like extremely perceptive me- um
Right.
methods.
You're
So we're
talking
talking
like Vajrayana, Tantra.
tantra and all of those get really fucking psychedelic. And if you're not like grandmaster level already, so to speak, you're just going to be taken advantage of. If you have a whole bunch of non-masters trying it out, they're just
Mm-hmm.
going to repeat the self indulgent sort of
Right.
variation. It's what
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to say is that it's not like in itself bad, but in order to do it in a good way, like it has to be either perfect or not at all. And that's like that goes in line with why Vajrayana is actually a very secretive organization unto itself, in that they've recognized that early on. But the problem is that as time goes on, corruption sets in. All of that uh, walling off is actually detrimental, not useful
Mm-hmm.
over
Because then you
time.
have things behind closed
So,
doors.
so it's a tough call. Like Vajrayana is amazing when it works, and it's horrifying if when it doesn't, because of the capacity for just damage, pure and simple.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it's kind of like one of those. It's kind of like nuclear fusion. Done right, you get, yeah, fusion. Done right, you get our sun, you get the world, you get life. Done not right, you get the A bomb, and then you incinerate absolutely everything
Mm-hmm.
and sterilize it.
Right.
So that's the A bomb of the model. Perceptive. You have to have. That's. It's really why only basically Vicky fits that bill right now in our group, because she has the capacity for with holding off the damaging parts, like like um, her attitude, I guess, prevents that from happening, and that's what you need, right? Like that's the kind of
Mm-hmm.
that's the kind of holding back power that you need, the kind of personality that you will need to really shine through this particular temperament. I don't think I've I don't think we've stumbled onto anyone else that is quite so versatile in that specific temperament. Just just trying to I'm not it's I'm not trying to single her out so much as I'm just trying to point out the kind of personality that it takes, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to be so fucking caring about the totality of the world, if you will, of the moment, that it won't allow you to take those missteps of taking advantage of other people, because like we're talking about psychedelic shit, we're talking about perceptive manipulations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you manipulate somebody's perception towards your own ends and they trust you, that's fucking horrifying.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, top and bottom.
That was a tangent, sorry.
The model. Well, not really.
It's a danger zone.
It's a danger that when you have that disconnection between the kind of ideal world and the concrete.
And you'll find that because the most susceptible temperaments to get manipulated are also in the devotional and the perceptive side, and that has to do with not breaking everything down into its com- compartmentalized components the way academic will do, and putting it all back together.
Hmm.
So if you don't do like that, it becomes an opaque situation.
Right.
And with devotional, opaqueness is necessary, and with perceptive, that's like the tool of the trade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, it's all interesting. I'm just, I keep trying to think of how we can kind of draw this back to what what we're talking about, what we're working on, and I was like, as far as what we were talking about with the intro, what are we doing that's different? I thought that was an interesting kind of thing to
Mm.
kind of dabble in a little bit, and
Well,
like with the fundamental guilds and all that, and
first,
the archetypes,
if I may do a little bit of
and the fact that this whole entire system as described um, needs to at least effectively be carried by the individual, right? So that
internalized.
internalize this as if there's like a, you know, an overarching, not a command structure, but like a structure that of the guild and how it works. It's not something you're just subject to. It's coming from within because you have these abstract higher level organizational structure capacity
To refer to, yeah.
within you, right?
Yes.
It's not an outside externalized thing
Right.
that's pressing your buttons and your levers.
This is that one touchy little point in where it may in fact feel like a religion in a way because of that. Like that's where that comes from. That internalization, that having to manifest the outer outcome from within yourself to paint the picture, if you will.
Hmm.
That aspect of it is what sounds extremely religious to most people.
Right. And when you talk about like say community gardens or like other like food sharing stuff like that.
Food sharing already has an interesting negative connotation. It suggests that there's people with and people without somehow.
Right.
Meanwhile, food is just supposed to be a
My
pit
point
where
is,
you take, where you take it out from.
my point there, I guess, is that when we think about these things and we try to think about organizing them, we're thinking within the paradigm of the market economy,
Yes.
and that screws everything up.
A lot. Yeah. That kind of the delineation created by the market is fucking it up. Yeah.
Right. And with that, we shall be right back. Oh yeah. Then we is back. Who is back? So yeah, market-based thinking
Fuck shit up.
seems to be the go-to for everywhere, anybody. Thinking of solutions, it's always like that. It's the supply and demand thing.
So, I noticed you were triggered by, understandably, I have the same triggers, by the consensus discussion recently. Can you, like, without naming names, go over where that hit you specifically? Because I know I can explain myself, but I do want to hear it from...
Yeah, well, like, I guess the scenario might as well be a community garden, like something I always love to use that as an example.
In fact, we're starting our first use case with
And
that.
management or organization, yeah, like it's perfect. It makes sense. It's something people do. They
It's simple.
set up gardens, and multiple people need to
Gardens effectively grow themselves.
work together. Then when you've got food, it's going places, right? Like there's demand for that.
You know what I think I'm triggered by? Calling it a community garden.
Why?
In my head, there's a garden. It's obviously going to be used by some community.
Right.
Like, I don't... The idea of
Well,
somebody
a
possessing a
private-
garden and then sharing it, that's, like, weird to me from the context of the guild itself. Because the guild doesn't really work that way. That's the marketing side of it. You know what I mean?
No. So there's private gardens.
it's the-
Somebody owns it. They're making their garden. The idea of a community garden is you have somehow a space is being facilitated, provided, that multiple people are working on.
No, to me, that's just a garden.
But it's commonly referred to as a community.
No, I know.
garden.
I think my stickling point is that from the perspective of like a guild member, there's no, this is a private garden, this is a community garden. There's this garden, that garden. They all operate in the same way. They all need the same things. They do the same, similar things they're the same entity. So you don't perceive ownership of it. You just perceive its operation, its existence, its beingness.
So
That's the difference. It's not about like trying to take gardens away from people. The market side is what the trade guild is for. To cover that base of private versus community versus this. That's the face shown to the outside.
I get it that like gardening skills apply whether it's to a private or a public quote unquote garden.
I'm more trying to drive at, you gotta think of things differently than you would in marketing. In marketing, the trade guilds operative side, you will have a community garden, a private garden. All of that's going to be delineated in the accounting. So to the outside world, it's all legal, right? This belongs to that, this belongs to them, this belongs to them. But inside the guild, those distinctions disappear. As in, members don't think that like that. Aware of it, yes. Aware, yes. But utilitarian, the utility of having gardens isn't going to be about property. It can't be about property. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
The view has to be different.
Okay, we haven't even set up this scenario yet, and you just picked it all apart without
Sorry.
it even existing yet.
Sorry, it just bugs me that they're delineated that way.
I know, but we have to talk about things that people understand.
Let's step back. Let's take what I just said out of the picture. let's continue because I did do that and I apologize. That was not the specific intent there. I'm just a little triggered.
So, we have a piece of land that potentially many people are interested in. Why are they interested in? That's another story, I guess. But
Yeah.
the fact is that you've got some productive land. There's something coming out of it, and people want it. They want to either work together on it, but when they put their effort into it, they want to get their piece of the pie out of it, right? So it's kind of like transactional
Well,
thinking, typically, right?
Sure, you wanna, if you're on a hunt, you wanna get your couple bites in, right?
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Like nobody's saying that that's not the case.
Right. So if you start up a group that's like, let's say like their ownership of land is a fact, right? All land is owned. We can't get around that, right?
No, we have to-
Somebody owns it.
That's why I mentioned the trade guild. Like that's the
Right.
interface.
So you've got a piece of land that's owned by somebody. That somebody wants to do some guild-like activity. In other words, they want to turn it over to demand whatever.
The purpose of their ownership of the land is to inject that land into the guild
Right.
for the guild to utilize
Yes.
as a whole.
So, you've got this question of, okay, so you own it. Technically, you can kick everybody off at any point and just say, haha, it's all mine now, because
Yeah.
I never said I had to pay you to do this.
That's where the tall order really comes into play.
Right. So we know about this. However, this is still the mechanism to interface with the market.
Yeah.
Because the land is owned, there's no way around that.
Gotta get that paperwork flowing.
Right. And so it's up to that owner basically to have this structure we were talking about, this overarching structure
Yep.
within their own heart,
Yeah.
right?
And by heart, we don't mean like metaphorical. We just mean they've internalized it.
It's part of their being.
Their thinking process.
Yeah. So I guess so let's bring in the idea of consensus, that as in what kind of triggered us and often does, this idea that everybody has to be on the exact same page, and you'll get a vote and you get a vote
Until something moves.
and if more than 50% vote, then that means boom, this decision is made or that decision is made, right? And that's
Despite the fact that maybe 49% of the
are getting screwed over
like
nothing.
is completely out of their.
Right. Yeah. So, where this gets resolved, I think, is in context, and where that type of thinking tries to resolve the issues is abstractly outside of context, right?
Yeah,
So
which amounts to really obfuscation. That's what obfuscation becomes.
So the typical kind of thinking around this sort of thing is like, well, yes, I own the land, but I pay tax on the land to the government. I have to. Therefore, whatever structure we're going to create, first order of business is income, right? So you're already like
Kind of fucked.
pretty screwed.
Pretty
And-
screwed, kind of fucked.
Yeah. So it's already, the machine is built into the land itself, sort of. So
Well, to the overarching upper structure of the civilization,
yeah,
the paperwork,
right.
the bureaucracy, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
that's, and that's the problem, really, is that if reality lives in the bureaucratic sense, it doesn't reflect what's actually happening on the ground of that same reality. It's all just paperwork.
Right. Right. And so you've sold off more than half of your goods in order to pay tax on the thing. Meanwhile, everyone that was working on it, their families are hungry. They could be starving.
I mean, congratulations, you've done absolutely fuck all for anyone.
Right. And somebody got richer.
And you're not doing that person a favor either, because they're just going to take in this undeserved whatever and continue on to shit on the world, doing the same thing, thinking this is the correct way to do stuff.
Okay. So now, first off, in our way of thinking with the guild, something like this would have to happen. That the owner of the land, needs to be of the mindset, no, I'm not getting people together to run a corporation and pay for my taxes. I am paying the taxes because I have a job. This land is gifted to the guild. Right?
Yeah, it's the gift economy.
It doesn't work. You can't just make it into a business operation. It's not part of the guild. It's not the guild.
It's a gift.
Right. So gift economy depends on those who have the ability to do so. And it's a bit of a tall order, but it doesn't take much
To actually sustain other people.
from people who have the means to do it to actually make a massive impact, especially when such ideas become popular.
The thing is that even the people with the have-not, if they are there as because they're gifted to work the land, what will happen is, as they do stuff for themselves, obviously that activity is going to have a surplus. Always does. That's why,
Right.
this is why we have history telling us that people didn't used to work most of the week out of their full day, whatever.
Right.
It would be like 15% effort for
Right.
the week to get everything that you need out of the world and live happily after the fact and rest the rest of your time. So now picture people incentivized to actually work because it benefits them to begin with. Of course there's going to be unasked for surplus. The idea that you're going to have somebody lazy taking advantage of somebody else is yeah, in this setup, yes, but in that setup, nobody grows up that way.
Right.
So it
And
covers those bases.
It's impossible to tell where people are able to contribute either. Well, so they ate some produce without farming or gardening.
What is possible to tell is that misery, depression, mental illness, and all of those things counteract productivity in every scenario, whether it's system or model. The difference is that the system lives on depression, lives on mental illness, and lives on all of these in this context in which nobody wants to actually do anything because it means nothing to them. It just means I can put some food on my table. I hate what I'm doing, but I'm doing it because I need the food. That's awful.
Yep.
And a different context, I'm doing this because I want to, and because I'm doing it, I get food anyway. Just keep doing it because you like it. And so production doesn't change, the attitude changes.
So,
Assuming the internal core constraints and everything has been internalized. Without that internalization, you'll have lazy slobs and all that. So
Yeah,
there's
right,
that's where it's
So
really is important.
your point of the common counterpoint to this is to say, well, people are just going to freeload and all that kind of stuff. Well, but
Civilized people will, yes.
that's due to, yeah, exactly, the all kinds of disease, depression, all this kind of crap, which
is already
takes
there.
time to reverse.
Yes, yes.
So that people are actually happy to be
where
doing,
the thing that they are.
helping out and being part of stuff.
Like picture a world in which today you're building furniture, but tomorrow you're working on somebody's car because you feel like it.
Hmm.
And it's not a problem because there were enough people here to know what the fuck you were doing already to continue that job, and you're not walking into your mechanic shop blank. You had a whole bunch of people working on this car already. They give you a full report of what's going on, and you just continue. You take over where they left off. Somebody takes over where
So-
you left off, and then maybe tomorrow you feel like working with wood again. Who knows? Maybe tomorrow you want to make a sandwich. Like,
So this
or cook. You know,
this
that's what I
idea
would do.
of running, so the garden is a corporation. It's a bunch of people organized together to do something with some objective.
But just small interjection. But notice the way I described it right now. Like in that corporation, somebody can leave for a moment, come back, leave, come back, work here, work here, work here. The whole week could be like a whole bunch of different jobs if you feel like it. Naturally speaking, if something needs momentum, some kind of job needs momentum. Like, so you can't, like an operation, you can't like leave in the middle and just like, hey buddy, just take over.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, obviously, like certain things
So-
have to be seen from beginning to end, but most things don't have that requirement.
People are joining a corporation. They're putting their work into it because they expect to control the outputs to their benefit. Right? That's why people usually would be, and this is the way of thinking about like a community garden, that's market oriented.
But that
Right.
kind of leaves out the whole idea of loving the labor itself. Like, people do things not necessarily just to make money, but because it makes them feel good too. Like, you don't carve out figurines.
But why would it
Because
make
they're
you feel
intrinsic-
good? See, there's a whole disconnection of this market mindset from what even would make you feel good, which is what? Probably helping people, right? How do you do that? This is where
The
we have to
market
introduce the institution.
And the market operates on exactly the opposite assumption. It operates on the fact that you make people not feel good, and that not feel good is what incentivizes them to pay you the money to remove the negative feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So,
By filling a need.
like, yeah. So, for example, why does cosmetic marketing work the way it does? Like, it basically, what does it do? It says you're fucking ugly. Right? It's already a negative situation. And then it goes, oh, but if I want to feel better about this, buy my shit.
Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to paint that picture of market versus polymorphism. Is that,
Yeah.
That's the word?
Yeah, I think we're doing a good job by
Yeah,
saying,
in economics.
by saying owner. This is where I got the ownership trigger thing. You remove ownership out of it, you remove the market. So, if you remove who the garden belongs to from the speech, it just becomes about gardens. The thing in itself.
Right, and
Not
so
the paperwork.
so the guild members looking at that are just like, okay, this piece of land has become part of the kingdom, if you will, and it's like, okay, well,
How can we use it?
well, let's look at our demand.
That's it. That's what I'm saying.
Look at our demand. Okay, people need this, that, and that. Who wants to do it? You'll feel
Can
great
we do
because
this? Can we do it here? No. Okay. Can we do this here? Yes. Okay. Let's try.
right.
The next iteration. Is it working?
Hmm.
Maybe this isn't the best. Next
And
iteration. We have this then too.
we shall be right back.
And all Like it's
We're
not
back.
it's not a situation where like I have to be right. It's more like this feels so fucking wrong.
Yeah, I'm trying to paint the picture of where activist people are often coming from when they're trying to kind of emulate wholesome community, I guess, or do that, execute on that, and how to do it. And we're seeing,
The market.
yeah, like a lot of the same thing. And these superficial sort of like ideas like consensus as just kind of
As pivotal.
overlording on it and boom, and then forget about it. Like
Just-
the decision's made, that's it.
Note how that consensus is a matter of paperwork. I mean, that's really the issue. If you're
Right.
pushing something into the realm of paperwork, you're removing it from being isomorphic with what's on the ground.
Right. And so the context that I remember that term coming up was like, again, you're running it as a corporation, a traditional
So you're an owner.
market-based economy. Yeah, and you want to be like, okay, I own this land, great, but I want to.
Here's your protocols.
I want a bunch of people to work together with me on it, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, yay, now we're a community, and so
But nobody in that community owns anything in that land.
not according to the charter. Yes, that's the idea. Is that you are a member of this garden corporation that we're coming up with, and therefore you get a vote. And if we have consensus on something, we all get to vote on something, right? Like how much of our produce are we going to sell to what market?
So-
we'll vote on that.
So here's a really immediate thing that comes up to me.
Welcome, Dill, by the way.
Your claim to working with that land rests with the capacity to maintain your membership with that group, which means you fucking have nothing. As soon as you're not in the same group think, if
Right.
you will, you're expelled, and so whatever membership claims you've had before are annihilated by a fucking stroke of a pen.
Yeah. So if you don't conform to some ideals or whatever, you're out.
Context. Trying to think about land given to community as somebody who has the means to purchase land. So you know how some rich people try to create wholesome communities by paying for the land and letting people live there?
Yeah.
Right off the bat, you have a problem, is what I'm saying. If you don't belong to the groupthink of whoever created this community, it's a stroke of a pen to expel you, and whatever communal claims you were part of are gone.
Right.
So it's fucking nothing. It's basically a bunch of fluff, is what I'm saying.
But at the same time, that's built into ownership itself. You can kick anybody off land that you own, whether it's the guild or
Right,
this.
it's built into our legal system, so you can do that. So basically, the legal system is set up in such a way that people can't really do fuck all, unless they're the one person with all that money, and that's it. That's okay. It's shit but just it's not usually talked about this way. So, in my mindset, I do want that community thing to happen, but this is definitely not going to happen that way. It can't. It's just not the route to it. Greed will not absolve greed, basically. It just, you either get rid of the greed, or you don't fucking bother.
Right, because the idea is if you're trying to set something up as a voting system, where members get to vote, you
You
can
lost.
only let people in as a member who you think are going to vote the way that you would vote. Basically, right? Why would you let people in who don't think like you?
Why
Exactly,
democracy doesn't actually work the way it's supposed to. Yeah. Like, for reference, I will say this: democracy is a terrible form of government, except for every single other form that's been tried. Like, it's still fucking horrible, though.
Because it depends on an informed
Well,
public.
first of all, informed public, nobody's informed. Second of all, if you have 51% of the votes, you have 49% unhappy.
Sure.
Like, that is not that's okay for some things. Like, do we get the fuck out of here because because the truck's coming my way? Of course you're gonna vote one. Everybody's gonna vote a single way, but in more like nuanced situations, it's like if your needs change from day to day to day to day to day to day, you can't set up a decision over here and then expect it to work all the time. Right, like that, and then that's how we try to operate. We try to make a decision today for 10 years from now.
I think you nailed it there with the idea that a decision can be made far off in a far off land that that affects the entire region, right? And that the region being the context.
But the region being the context switches its configuration minute to minute, right? Like, people are people. They're like, you can't control when you need to take a shit.
It's true.
These kinds of things don't enter this spectrum of thinking of bureaucracy. That's why I don't want to live in a world built on paper.
Yeah.
Even though I do
always-
live in a world built on paper.
Ideas sound good in retrospect, but when it comes to reality, they don't always pan.
Yep.
I was just telling Brian, like, the way I envision the full setup of this world, the ideal world, if you will, it's like, say today, you're working on furniture. Tomorrow you wake up, you feel like working on cars. People here, for example, know exactly what you're doing. They can just continue on the work. People over there gave you enough information to pick up on whatever the problem is. You just do that for the day. Tomorrow you might want to be cooking. Or you know what I mean? And then the next day you come back because you want to finish whatever tidbits and nuances on the piece of furniture you were working on in the beginning. And nobody's losing out. Like, we're not talking about loss of work, we're not talking about productivity loss, we're not talking about no responsibility. We're just saying that as an individual person, you're not the same day to day to day to day. Why are you fucking stuck doing the same things all the fucking time?
Yeah.
Right? Like, you probably have other passions, right? I clearly do. Like, why can't I do this for a while and then fuck off and do what I like for what I do for work, and then cook for what I love cooking? Why can't I cook one day out of my month or something? Technically I can, but I would have to take so many resources to compensate for everything. It's just like, it's not even worth it. Why do we live in a world that's so rigid? Like, you can understand the conundrum, right? Like, we have so many options, quote unquote, none of which we can take. What the fuck?
Yeah. It's all that freedom.
Which isn't, it's just a very real illusion.
Yeah.
It's, yeah, you're free to do that, but then you don't get to eat for weeks. Like, cool.
I think what the all this discussion so far hasn't brought in a way of thinking yet that actually deals with the root of the problem, and that I think we'd have to bring in the idea of the institution and the collection of demand, that we all have demands.
So, trigger words. Institution is a trigger word because institution implies an overarching
Right.
authority.
Yeah. From you're right. From a model perspective, from the model that we developed, the way we use the term institution is
The reference to everybody. It's a reference to everybody at once.
it's a collector of demands.
Right.
So in right now in normal society, you can demand all you want. Nobody gives a fuck, flying fuck, and unless you're giving cash for that. That's how you demand.
Yeah, you have no supply. This is a reversed idea where demands are actually primary, and and supply is bound to what
So,
demands
like,
are.
this
So
idea
you don't
that
supply
you're
shit that people don't demand.
that you're talking about. Oh, I can work at a shop, and I can go to an auto shop and work there. Or I can go to a restaurant and cook or whatever.
Hmm.
These places have to be responding to demands.
Somebody wants to eat. Somebody needs a car fix. Somebody needs a piece of furniture.
And this flips the whole economy on its head in a completely different way. That what's demanded is what drives everything. It's not just
I have this thing.
a
How do I
business
make
a
them
businessman like, okay, I'll build 3 factories and spew this product, and they'll pay me this much X amount, and I'll get more. I'll have more money at the end, right?
And more and more and more.
That's the way that it's running right now.
Well, the other element of that is that you create a product and then you try to go to the market and create a need for that product, which is the reverse of what we're talking about.
Like advertising,
It's
saying you're
first
ugly.
you have to have a need from the market. That's how you know what to supply, because otherwise, you're just wasting
Right.
fucking
There's a
resources
massive
what?
waste. This
For what?
paradigm is massively wasteful.
And we're not
And-
talking about just like feeding and like we are saying entertainment is a demand. Like we're not talking about like removing fun out of everything, and we're not just saying, hey, it's got to be all utilitarian or else. What's the fun? What's the point in that? Yeah. So we're aiming high, and we know we never get there. So don't worry about that. We're not confused. But hey, like if I'm gonna spend my time thinking about betterment, why not? Why not all of it? I'm not that selfish.
Well,
I'd
anyways,
like you to have fun too.
we are writing a program, a social media app to facilitate this type of.
to try and
build.
dive into this situation.
So you can set up these little microeconomies based on gifting basically, in which demand is collected. You see right away what people need, and if you want to, you basically can gift your time into that. But you also get to demand stuff, right? So that's how, if you have resources coming into a system like that,
Yeah.
it ends up being like hyper efficient compared to the waste of market.
Yeah. The way we're really looking at it is kind of like trying to copy nature. So the idea is like there's only like small variance between what makes you and me in our DNA, for example. Like there's a certain a core element of us being human that is exactly the same in some sense, right? Like we hear the same kinds of sounds, we see the same colors, we move the same fingers, we have a kind of reciprocate mechanisms that we can talk to, right? So that's what we're trying to reflect with this program. Like you're trying to create a core DNA of what we call constraints. So yeah, you can do anything, but usually that goes to shit. So if you want it not to go to shit, constrain it this way, that way, the other way. So first constraint being the environment. You have to pay attention to what the environment gives you. Another constraint is like your health and your capacity to function. So you have to eat, you have to shit, you have to clean, right? And you have to dress. Like all of these things. There's like coming out, waste, coming in, nutrition, right? That's a constraint. There are no organisms outside of this constraint. They eat, they shit, period. And they exist in their environment. And they have to figure out how to do it all.
Mm-hmm.
So the total picture is the environment plus the organisms living in it, trying to figure out and map in their mental processes same environment. So the environment together with that is even more nuanced, right? Like, so it's not just like your natural world, but it's also your artificial world at the same time. So what we're saying is that like use those things to be like your core religion, maybe you want to call it. Just always have that in mind, because that's how religions operate, right? Like believe that, believe that.
Mhm.
I'm not talking about belief here. You can see that for yourself, right? So you don't need to believe what I'm just saying, unless it just doesn't make sense, right? Like I'm trying to say like it looks like belief, but if you listen to the content, there's nothing here you need to literally believe in. You just like, yeah, I see it. You look again, yeah, I still see it, right? Like, so you belief doesn't factor
Yeah.
ultimately. So if you take in that core whole, I'm not saying I've done it, I'm just talking about it. Then that's the quote unquote religious connotation that we have about how this needs to work. It has to come from within. It has to have like a whole bunch of people that really, really think this way. Because otherwise they're just going to have, again, this systemic paperwork, greedy, selfish things that go haywire in any direction. So today I can trust you, tomorrow you've made a deal with somebody else, right? So when we say it's a tall order, we do mean it's probably not going to happen in our lifetimes or anything like that.
Well, it happens all
Or
the
at
time.
all.
Happens all the time, buddy.
To individuals, but not collectively. This is where Buddhism came from, thinking like that. Before computers, though.
That's idealistic thinking is.
That's just me.
Doesn't help.
That's just me. It's how I arrived at a lot of my thinking.
There's
So-
never a time where everybody is going to be on board.
Well, yeah, no.
That
This
doesn't
is
exist.
why I hate the
'Cause
word
you have-
consensus
you have
so
people,
much.
people being born every day who don't know about it.
Sure.
Who don't know about life, right? They're always born.
I think I'm just like still railing on the word consensus. You can't. It doesn't. It's not a thing.
Dude, slow down, man. Like,
Sorry.
just take a breath.
I got
You're just
excited.
jumping and zipping from like a million different topics. Like, I've
I-
passed up like 5 good comments in like
Sorry.
the last 15 minutes.
Here's what's
So
happening.
like, I just can't even say anything.
Here's what's happening. I got overexcited on a set of new ears.
All right. Well, you don't even know if he understood yet because
I
there's
know,
an
I'm-
occasional nod and
I keep waiting for the questions.
Yeah, I'm not.
No, if
I'm
you,
not
if
gonna question.
if it's not you, if it's not your thing, it's not your thing too. It's kind of like one of those. If you see it, you see it. You don't, you don't.
Yeah, but I understand what you're saying.
I think everybody has like a heart, you know. to,
No,
like-
I think what I just did is that's my passion, and I just like let it flow. But that's where it can end.
Like, and we all have a family that we've grown up in too, right? Like, your parents didn't have to give you everything, right? But we know that it's possible for humans. Just like you had a demand, you said I'm hungry or whatever, and like before you know it,
Somebody put
There's
food on your
food.
table, yeah.
right?
Yeah,
It's not
actually,
alien.
childhood is a great way to understand what the gift economy is really, really trying to get back to. It's trying to like create this exact same relationship that families actually have with themselves, but on a grander human scale. So, the gift economy is exactly what it sounds like. It's like you give what's needed. So you hear a demand, you have whatever is demanded for, and you do that. But if everybody does the same thing, nobody goes without. There's no question about lazy people or anything like that. It's more like today I can, tomorrow I can't, and that's just the way it goes, and everybody accepts that. And it's accepted to a certain point until you're like with some people until like you're 18 or something shit like that, right?
Yeah.
Which is weird. Like,
Could-
how do you how, like what changed if not on some piece of paper? That's disgusting to me. Like that kind of
Like, people are going without education. Like, they want to go to college or go to university. They don't have maybe a car. I don't know if that's a great example, but even like the ability to afford transportation. And yet these are like very inexpensive things that can be satisfied on a large, massive scale. So you've got all these things that would make life so much better, that would make each of us way more productive, and we've all been strangled slowly but surely, pushed into a corner. Like if you look at the cost of living rising, but real wages stagnant for the last how many decades? Like people aren't, like, your money goes up, but inflation, all that, like you're just making the same amount. But if you consider how many like billionaires there are, practically trillionaires, and that concentration of wealth and guarding of wealth is basically we've been sucked dry, bone dry, and like all this potential, just because we believe in it, is stored away in money of somebody else's account, right?
So basically, we have a shit ton of things to do, and nobody to do it because nobody will pay for it.
Right. Yeah. So like
What?
when you think about times like when the economy,
And we call ourselves civilized.
when the economy collapses or war comes through and all that, you have neighborhoods, vast neighborhoods and communities who there's nothing to do. There's like so much to do that needs to be done. You know, all kinds of rebuilding. People need food and all this kind of stuff, medicine, but there's no money. The money has been washed out, right? So what does that mean? Like, you can have a whole country of perfectly able-bodied people, all the technology and industry you'd ever want, and it's all sitting there doing nothing because little pieces of paper have, no, I don't know, there's no paper. How do I do it? Like, you're not going to operate the machinery unless someone inserts the paper bill into your wallet, right? It just doesn't, like, on its face, it sounds ridiculous. And so that's kind of what we're talking about. It's a parallel economy. It's not meant to, like, say, oh, this is the right way to do it. It's like, this has to be an option because that's the natural way, right, of life.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
On another note, this beer's pretty fun.
The cream ale. It is nice. Help yourself. I'm going slow on it. Going easy.
And it's gonna duck out after this.
Yep. Did you get done what you wanted to do today?
Yeah. It's pretty much done.
Damn. You gonna get Dougie to finish it up?
Yeah. Like I can stay there.
Yeah.
Not hear it.
So you're going dark, or
Yeah.
right? Kind of match like the trim a little bit more, I guess, or
Well, just so it jumps out, like just so it doesn't, so it looks purposeful, you know, like it's not.
right. Yeah. There's like a lot of white on it, I guess, on
It's
the
like
the
a
enamel.
greenish kind of creamy color. It's not the.
Right.
You really gotta look at it.
Yeah. Are you picking a stain that like complements that little tone you're talking about?
Yeah, I don't know. I'll just fucking start fucking around with colors, just mix some shit in the cup and see.
He's gonna be an artiste.
Yeah.
There you go.
I am mildly artistic, you know. I do like to create things.
What do you do outside of here, if you don't mind?
Outside of here,
I don't know you personally.
I like the outdoors. I like, camping
All right, I can see it.
and being outside.
You do have the look about you.
Thank you. I don't know. I like to play music.
Hunting?
I don't hunt.
No?
No.
Oh, I figured you would be.
Yeah, like all the other guys.
Looks
in
can
my
be
family-
deceiving, Jenny.
I know. I just said I'm going by looks.
Like all the other guys in my family, they're all hunters and that, but not me. I just, honestly, I don't think I could bring myself to
Really?
actually shoot something. Unless I was like,
Starving.
gonna die or something, like life or death situation.
Yeah.
But just the sake of.
And here I thought of myself as like the tame one. But I would definitely hunt.
Like, it's fun. I like shooting guns and stuff like that.
Mhm.
I'm not. I love the smell of it for some reason.
Yeah, it smells pretty good.
Yeah.
Indeed, indeed.
What else do I do? I like to cook. You said you like cooking and
Oh
shit.
fuck yeah.
I like
Outdoor or indoor?
both.
Same.
Just the other weekend there, I cooked on a fire. Like, I got a little fire cooking back.
Well, what'd you do? What'd you make?
Just a pork loin.
Fucking love pork. My daughter, she's 5. She's like, pork is for girls.
Yeah.
She loves that shit, man. Oh my god. But I'm experimenting with like marinades and like different ways to like infuse the meats with flavors and shit. And I've been like burning meats outdoors for quite some time. Like this whole summer has been just like charcoal, just no briquettes, no nothing like that, just flavor,
Nice.
smoked almost
Mhm.
everything.
Well, you just got that barbecue this year, wasn't it, or last year?
$600 investment. It's a charcoal barbecue with like it looks like your standard gas one with the table and everything, and it takes in a small tank of gas, and a pipe comes in like right through the middle. So what you do is you take your charcoal, you burn it for like 3-4 minutes.
Just get it going.
Yeah, and so those green tanks last me like a whole fucking summer.
No way.
Yeah, because I don't burn the rest of it on
Yeah,
gas.
you're not cooking with it.
Oh, I got a call. 1 second.
Shell pause.
It did its job.
Damn.
I make some wicked fucking food. Like some recipes, like I've started to adopt from my parents.
Yeah.
So like some of the more, not like I don't even know if we ever did it traditionally. But one of the reasons I love cooking is because my family like they start eating it, and it's like usually it's food that they would never touch. So that face that they make, oh, I don't know if you cook, I don't know if you cook for the same reason, but
Most of the time I just cook for myself, but like I'm always like, fuck, like if somebody was here to like eat this too, like it'd be so amazing.
Yeah.
Then yeah, like I'll whatever, go to my sister's place or something, I'll just be like, I'm gonna fucking barbecue today, and like whatever, I'll make something and everybody's like, yeah. This is
and here's something I've learned through cooking stews and stuff like that. Stew and beef. Have you ever had somebody cook you a soup with beef in it where you just chew and chew and chew on the beef and it's just like nasty shit?
I haven't, but I understand what you're saying.
I figured out why, and it's because they're shitty cooks. It's not the beef. Yeah. If you ever do stew and beef, always let it run boiling for at least an hour before you add anything else.
I'll just break it all down.
All of the collagen and all of that connective tissues just disappears, and the resulting pieces of meat are like melt in your mouth deliciousness like you wouldn't believe. Like you never chew anything, it just falls apart. So never make that mistake, because stew and beef is a tough cut of meat.
Yeah.
Like it's got no fat.
It's just, yeah, offcuts. They just fucking, same shit they use for like hamburger and all that. It's all just offcuts.
And also another tip, brown it. Definitely brown it, and then deglaze.
Yeah.
Definitely deglaze, because
That's all
that
the
shit.
flavor.
That's all I'm gonna say about that. If you ever do stew and beef, never let it sit less than an hour, because otherwise people will think you're a shit cook. But over an hour, gonna love you. I do cook for others, so that's how I talk.
Yep. I
Anyway.
cook pork strips like that sometimes, just in like a pan, but like hour and a half even, just on low, like just keep it going.
Yeah,
And
it's gotta
it'll
boil.
it'll break apart eventually. like,
Yeah,
with
those,
this beef.
those tough cuts just need time. That's all it is.
Yeah. Yeah, low and slow. That's the key.
Always.
Like tenderness.
The other thing is,
I'm just like thinking about pulled pork right now.
like you'll get some steaks. I can't remember which one. It's like shank or something. Like is like really tough, or they'll say it's like. I guess
Yeah.
they'll call it stewing.
Shank is that strip of meat, right? Like that has no fat in it. It looks like almost like a tail or something.
Yeah.
Mm,
Well, there's
you
that-
have
But
to
anyways, there's another way to deal with that, which is the fucking
Pound the
hammer.
shit. Yeah, pound the shit out of it.
I love that. You just fucking go ham on that shit.
I do that to my chicken breasts, actually.
Yeah.
You even because if you one thing it tenderizes, but the other thing is it evens out the profile,
Yeah.
and so when you cook it, it's actually cooked more
Yeah.
evenly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This food talk's making me hungry.
All right.
So what are you having?
I don't know.
We had to change our sacramental meal from the great burrito to the sub. They stopped cooking the rice properly.
Yeah, like
Do you
uh,
mind? Can you
every
imagine
other
biting
time.
into a burrito and then like hard rice is stuck in your teeth everywhere? Fuck that shit.
Yeah, like for a burrito, mucho burrito, right?
Used to be good. No, it ain't.
Never happened like that, but yeah, I don't know what it is.
Was
Bro.
it just an off day or was it consistent?
No, it started to be more consistent now.
Yeah.
So we're like, fuck it. We're not having our quote unquote sacramental meal with you guys anymore.
Yeah, I was thinking like
Like fuck you. You're not doing your job.
I was thinking of like many times, like for the last months even, I was thinking like when I go in, it's like, how's your rice? Can I like try a little bit of it, or can I just try it?
Before I buy it.
Right? Like which one is more cooked, like the brown or the white? You know, like
And I think it has to do with like they changed their staff because
Yeah.
we're starting to see the same people and the same people are failing.
yeah.
Maybe you just need to go to a different mucho.
No, we did that. So this was the last one that was actually any good, and then they started doing that shit too.
The one on Mapleview?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I used to like I live on Leacock, and I used to like in Skip, I would make sure it was that one, not any closer shop. I would pay the extra fee for delivery. And then they stopped being the best ones too. So it's like, okay,
Have you tried like
Pita Pit is our next one.
that?
I was saying we
fat
Fat Bastard or Bar Burrito. There's like a bunch of others. We should try them, I think.
I don't know. I don't know if I need to. I
haven't.
I don't know if I need it to be a burrito per se. The Pita Pit is actually pretty good too.
It's kind of a burrito. I mean,
It is with a lot of the same toppings. You can-
Sure, yeah.
just more Mediterranean style. Tzatziki is nice. Oof,
it is nice.
very
Mm.
nice. How old are you?
Pardon me?
How old are you?
36.
I keep thinking you're in your 20s.
I wish.
You're just too wrinkled for that imaging at this point. I know I am too, don't worry.
Yeah, even that.
It's not a real I did that today.
The new kid working with us, like, he's only 18,
What?
and I was like, fuck, man, like, I got tattoos that are older than you. And I was like, I'm 36, and he's like, dude, you don't look 36. You don't look like you've been in high school for 17 years or whatever. Well, I have.
Right.
Do you have any religious views?
Not particularly, no.
I don't want to step on anything, on any tails.
No, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not religious.
What's your background, if you don't mind? I'm not interrogating you.
Like
I'm just like
the
catching up.
heritage, like
Yeah.
Dutch, German, English. I'm just a European blood. I'm just Russian.
And those are on the Catholic side, probably,
Yeah,
especially Dutch.
yeah, but again, like my family was never religious. Like my grandpa.
No, I'm a Jew without being Jewish, so it's like it's the same shit. I discovered my quote unquote path in my 30s, so it's not like like and it turned out to be like Buddhist.
Yeah, it's just-
Totally unaffiliated with anything I've been born into.
I was just gonna say, if I was to be any religion, I think I'd be Buddhist.
Buddhism caught my eye in a weird way. Like I'm extremely what you would call atheistic in nature. Like I don't generally
Yeah, same.
I
That's
don't
how I was
generally
raised.
subscribe to any like you know, if you tell me something is supernatural, my next question will be like, does it appear in nature? Oh, so how is it supernatural if it's appearing in nature, right? Like that's my mindset. So with a, you know, here's how I describe it. Buddhism is like 2,000 years ago, ish, or just a bit over. And this person is like basically looking at the world and and saying something to the effect of, shit, this is an operating system, like your Windows operating system. Like your brain is running an extra program without having words for computer, without having. So how do they express that? Through the theology that they know at the time, right? But the description of what they're saying. So they use the words gods, they use the words demons, they use all of these heavens and hells and all of that stuff. But we're trying to make a point about like, in your operating system, you're running these programs. One of them is hell, one of them is heaven, one of them is humanity, one of them is whatever, right? Again, without knowing anything about computers or whatnot. So to try to convey that kind of information and encode it in a way that people would understand will naturally sound like a whole bunch of theistic mumbo jumbo if you're not aware of what the fuck is saying. But if you look at the actual content, the actual thing, he's not talking about like reality is reality, blah 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 blah. He's talking about like that's what appears as reality in your program. And so, what do you do with that instead of like, what do you do with that reality? That's the difference. That's the main difference of what Buddhism brought to the table. That's different than Hinduism. That's different than Christianity. That's different than any other thing.
What, saying like it's a metaphor?
Right, like taking
Like
the
the
whole notion,
mythological language is just a metaphor for what's actually going on in your head.
like talking about appearances as delusions and illusions and ignorance, right? It's not ignorance of the world. It's so much as the ignorance of your own programming.
Yeah,
The-
and like also like Buddhism, it's just like, you know, let people be people. Like there's no like
Yeah.
real guidelines. It's not like, you know, you're not gonna go to hell if you fuck before you're married, kind of thing. or whatever, you know, like-
Here's a true.
You just don't want to go to hell, Dill. That's what it
Here's a
is.
true testament. Here's how you know somebody is really, really quote unquote a Buddhist. You can't tell them apart from the rest of the population at all.
No, yeah.
They don't exist in a
Yeah,
sense.
they don't push their religion or anything.
Well, it's actually one of the few religions like Christianity that had proselytizers. What's the word? Proselytize? You know, like missionaries going on and preaching.
Yeah.
So they had that, but it was the difference being is that it was always a conversation rather than a conversion motive. The conversion into Buddhism happened in the eastern side of the world, mostly on its merits, not necessarily like do or die kind of a thing. And that's the other thing. And you see like variations of it. It becomes very different in Japan. It becomes very different in Mongolia. It becomes very different in China. It becomes very different in Tibet. Like it adopts to the culture that it's in.
Yeah. Yeah. Like there's Indian Buddhism.
Well,
There's like
Indian
China.
Buddhism looks extremely different than Chinese Buddhism for very cultural reasons.
Mhm.
So in India, at the time of the Buddha, one of the things that was considered to be noble to do is to give up your worldly life and be a beggar. That was seen as a plus, not a minus. So a beggar in that sense would have been somebody who will collect food from you in exchange for teachings. So there is an established relationship. It's not like lazy people just begging shit.
Mhm.
It's more like my job is to now teach you. I teach based on donations. The reason for that is because Buddhism does not consider money to be the proper element of world function. It's a gift economy.
Okay.
So in that sense, you are gifted food, and you are gifting your knowledge.
Yeah.
It's a job, right? You go to China, begging is not a thing. Begging is looked very much down upon.
Mhm.
So instead, what you see is monasteries getting set up with self-sufficiency. So now you have this image of Buddhism and that image of Buddhism. Then it goes to Japan, and then it adopts the warrior culture. Then you have that version of Buddhism, which is Zen and all of that shit with the samurais and
Mhm.
how they do this. They do their shit. On the one end of the spectrum, you got like this very non-violent
Pardon?
vegetarian people. On the other end of the section, you have warrior monks, like that will fucking kill you if you cross them wrong.
Yeah.
It's, Buddhism is not like any, like one like you'll even have situations in which one section is arguing with another section of Buddhism, but in the overall Buddhist scheme, it's like, okay, well, this conversation is about that, and they're right about this, they're right about that. Together, this is still Buddhism. Like on the surface, it's a contradiction. Underneath, it really isn't, because that flow goes with these assumptions, that flow goes with those assumptions, and of course, with those assumptions, they'll contradict. Take those assumptions away, you see how they are working together anyway.
Mhm.
So it's like, it's speaking to the fact that there's multiple ways to skin a cat, if you will. Like, just because you don't do it this way doesn't mean that my way is wrong. Right? Like,
Mhm.
it's like telling somebody they're chewing wrong. Yeah, but you don't have the shape of their mouth,
Yeah.
right?
But you would still have the same Four Noble Truths kind of deal, like
But you still need to chew.
the archetype, the archetype.
Yeah, the archetype being the ideal form of something. It's a word we use for like an ideal. Have you heard the word archetype before?
Archetype? Or-
Archetype.
Yeah, I have heard it.
It's like, I say, picture a frog. So the frog that appears in your head is like the archetype of frogness.
Mhm.
Because there's this kind of frog, that kind of frog. You're not going to imagine all of them. You're just going to imagine like creatures sitting with legs,
Yeah. The green thing with
a,
the
green.
a blob of a body, and perhaps maybe the eyes.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it's a generic, archetypical frog that doesn't exist in the real world at all.
You're right.
So your mind can't literally process
Mm-hmm.
frogness without going into an ideal form.
Right. So that's the same with the Buddha, is an ideal.
While in reality, you have this frog, that frog, the other frog. So there's a difference between the archetype of frogness and individual encountered frogs, right? Like that's really what it's all about. Buddha is like the same thing. It's like they are perfect, ideal individual, but nobody is perfect in the real world. They exhibit Buddha-ness in this way, in that sentence, in that motion, in that whatever.
Yeah.
And that could stop, and somebody else can continue, or the same person can stop exhibiting it and continue. And you know what I mean? It's not like a solid state of being. It's more like when it fits with the picture, it's that. When it doesn't fit with the picture, it's not that. Plain and simple. And so, in this same sense, if you ever heard of in Buddhist terminology, everybody is a Buddha. Like there's a notion like that. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about like certain expressions that you do are in line with what quote unquote what would Buddha do, and in that moment in time, that's Buddha. The archetype. That's him present, or her. What doesn't fucking matter. That's it present, right? The point is the entity, not the gender or whatever.
They, them.
Yeah. Whatever. It's that's a different conversation. The idea being though is that it's not a permanent state of things. It's an expression of something. It's when it lines up with the ideal, you have that archetype. If it doesn't line up with the ideal, you have another archetype. So, in that sense, it's kind of like a deity, but also more like a role model.
Yeah. Just a guideline.
And Jesus should probably be seen in a similar sense, because it's like this unrealistic perfection of an ideal. If you follow in some of its steps, you're Christ-like. If you don't, you don't. It's the same notion. But if you hinge that conversation on whether Jesus is a real person, all that is lost, and it becomes so pointless.
Well, but this proves that in this the archaeological. Fuck.
It's been a slice.
I also don't believe in the
Yeah, deal.
I don't believe that there was a real
Good to
Buddha.
see.
As a person, I don't believe that was the
Oh, no.
case. I think what happened was that over the years, as groups of people got together, they've created an archetype for themselves to follow. That's the reflection of the perfect
Right.
path, and then
And you get all these stories like, oh, there
And then
was
they create a
once a
legend for
time
it.
the Buddha, a student came to the Buddha and asked him, and they remember this story, right?
Yeah.
There's this whole collection of these things, right?
Anyways,
Yep.
fellas, it's been a slice.
Indeed.
cheers. I hope we didn't overload you.
No, I'm gonna go and absorb all this.
Yeah. Say your
Only if you want to.
don't forget to meditate.
I will.
Also, please join our religion.
I will.
Nice.
Tell me where to sign.
Okay.
Good.
Paperwork is important.
That's late. We got one today.
Right.
That's our measure of success.
Speaking of success, I have another measure of it.
Okay. And we shall be right back.
So-
this is an example. What's an example? Our discussion with
this
Bill?
conversation and this.
How difficult it is to nail down concrete guilds.
Yeah, because like if you look at the flow of the
What
conversation.
concrete guilds?
No, if you look at the flow of the conversation, the attempts were to like bring down like how it concretely affects the on the ground people versus what's happening on paper, and on it goes, like this cycle of like trying to convey this is happening, it gets written down, but being written down, it doesn't reflect exactly what's happening, and if you make your decisions based on the papers, you're missing out on what the actual happenings on the ground are.
Right.
And so this is exactly what what we're having trouble with, in that sense that the abstract guilds tend to be like these almost concrete, always do this kind of guild, whereas the concrete guilds are always like, today we need this, tomorrow we need that,
Context.
tomorrow we need this. So they're they're less stable than the abstract ones, right? And it shows that relationship in many ways. Like it's almost exacerbated.
Exasperated.
No, exasperated.
Exacerbated.
Made larger by just honing in on the thing. Like if you put your lens on it, it makes that problem explode into multiple different directions.
Mm-hmm.
To try to tackle all at once.
So what are you talking about concretely, like with relation to talking with Dylan? You mean to describe things to him, or what?
Yeah, like even before Dylan got here, we were even stumped by the garden, community garden, personal garden, all of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the abstract sense, all you have is a garden. In the concrete sense, you have his garden, their garden, that garden. It just blows up.
Right. Maybe we should. I wonder if we should continue that a little bit, because I don't know if we did. Like, I tried to introduce the institution while Dill was here, like the idea of the institution as collecting demand, and this being a total. Maybe we did enough on that. A total, like, throwing the economy on its head, basically.
That was
The way we think of economy right now is an exchange
you have a supply.
of. Yeah. Right. But it's like tightly controlled by money, right? And money is made scarce.
Right. So your supply means nothing until it's profit.
Right.
Which it gives you the incentive of create the artificial demand. Because how are you going to turn your supply into profit? Forced demand.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and there's always that moral hazard to anybody who would ever try to sell their labor, their product, their service, whatever it is. The moral hazard is that you want people to be dependent on that so that you can keep making money and, in other words, survive.
Mm-hmm.
So you're incentivized to create a scarcity of what you're supplying.
It makes sense for something like cooking. Like, to not put like this is evil label on it. It does make sense for a situation like cooking. You're never going to run out of hungry people. Right? Like, that's just not a thing.
Yeah.
What you can run out of is people in need of a hammer that lasts a couple of decades. That's something you can run out of as far as demand. So, for example, you need hammers in the beginning. It's like everybody needs one. You produce all of that. But then they last a couple of decades. You're not going to see the same situation appear. You're going to see, oh, I need to replace that one broken hammer this year. Perhaps. Right? I mentioned this because there's a recent company that actually went out of business, and it was punished by creating a good product.
Yeah, I know. You're leading to and what does it call it? Engineered obsolescence.
Yep. Planned obsolescence.
Yeah.
That's actually a documentary I watched just a
Right.
couple of days ago.
And like again, this
With the subscription being the end, the whole holy grail for planned
this
obsolescence.
blows my mind how much waste there is, and yet everything is scarce. It's because there is so much waste. It's insane, and then this idea lets you understand, in terms of a gift economy, what kind of gift would you give? The one that lasts forever, or the one that breaks the next day? Like, why would anybody want the thing that breaks the next day, right? A good gift is a good gift. That's it. It's better if it lasts forever.
I think this is how the market is trying to pretend to be humane. The market pretends to be giving you these gifts by offering you these products for cheap, as it were. But it's a gimmick. It's playing the game of I'm giving you a gift, but it's like a gift that where you take the carpet from underneath the people's feet and pull it at a moment's notice. So you're basic.
Mhm.
So your gifts are basically
Well, it's deception. It's profit maximizing. You spend less.
lies. Lies. That's what it is. Lies.
You spend less to get your product, which satisfies certain appearances.
Not needs.
Boom, you're done.
Appearances.
Right.
Appearance of need.
Appearance of satisfaction.
And that lines up really well with Sorcery of the Spectacle. Society of the Spectacle. My apologies. The Society of the Spectacle essay, which basically notices that the progression in the market system is from having, from being into having, and from having into appearing to have.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very much lined up
Right.
trajectory.
Yeah. So I'm kind of wondering if we've kind of wrapped up that the discussion on like the idea about gardens and how many activist type people would think about, how do I run a garden for a community? How do I make it? How do we get together and run a garden that we can all benefit from? And the common paradigm is market. Right?
Okay. So
You have a consensus. You vote on where your products get sold. You have basically running a business together.
so question.
Right? It's a co-op. It's a cooperative.
So question. If we take that idea of those questions and condense it into this little device as a dashboard interface,
Yeah.
could we start to address what that looks like on the ground by describing both the app and the activities of the app users?
Yeah, we can, but first, just in theory, have we covered what we would need to convince any market-leaning activist to say, okay, market is not the right way, it has to be a gift? And what does that look like?
No, we have not done that.
Can
And
we
I don't
do
thi-
that quickly?
No. Unlikely. It's not likely that we're going to have a soundbite that is sales worthy right now. I don't-
Even just general,
We can touch on points,
Just-
but I don't know if we
like
can.
I feel like
I don't know if I have.
there has to be even a starting point to, like, okay, this is why. We touched on, first off, that the idea of voting and consensus and all this is a mind game, essentially, which is divorced from the context, which is where people need stuff.
Cool.
You are not satisfying demand that way. You're satisfying arbitrary calculations in a market.
Yeah. So that message basically says, don't do that. In its
What
To-
message?
what you just said.
Yeah. Don't do market.
That description is basically saying,
Don't divorce yourself
wait a
from
minute.
context. The context
This is not
people
like this
need
is
stuff.
if you're pressing your if you're using your thumb on this phone, that's not what you should be doing. Just put it that way,
Okay.
right? So what does the app actually do instead of that?
And by app week is synonymous with the guild.
App
What
guild,
does the guild do
The
that's
app
different?
is isomorphism. Yeah,
That's
so
different than that.
first of all, the exclusion paradigm. The notion of shunning. How
Right.
it goes away.
And inside and outside. So you have members of your little co-op that get to benefit only if they align ideologically. Otherwise, they're out.
Well, that's the usual.
Right.
That's the exclusionary model.
And this ultimately is not
That.
paradigm shifting. It's not that. That isn't changing things. That's a
Well, no,
continuation.
we don't shun. This system does not shun individual members. They can talk themselves out of relevance through coherence.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that the market as it exists is not addressing the problem.
Oh, okay.
That's what
So
I mean.
you're talking about the market as it is.
Yeah.
Yes. So the market as it is an exclusionary system. So that means if you're a ball player within a certain group's parameters, you're in that group. But as soon as you step out of those parameters, that group kicks you out. Shunning.
Right.
The paradigm of the civilized world.
Right.
The system does not shun. Instead, it has conversations. And in those conversations, you have what's called coherence. So the people talking between each other get to score the coherence level of that conversation.
Let's just say that that's an intuitive and natural process, not a thumbs up and down and like, just forget about that. That's too deep. I don't like going into that so early.
Imagine you talking to me, as you often have done, and one conversation is shit, another conversation is great.
Okay, this like we're away from the garden now. I feel
Yeah.
like.
No, well, it could be about the garden. It doesn't matter what the context is. It's about the conversation any individual has in any context.
I need food. That's the start of
Okay.
conversation.
Okay, if I respond to you with, well, to get food, you should work better.
Okay.
How do you rate this interaction? How do you rate this communication within the guild?
That's shit.
I rate it high, you rate it as shit. What happens to the total score? Neutral. So the person feeding bullshit is actually blocked in some sense. They're not pervading over you in a sense. Imagine them doing over and over and over and over and over again. You rate the people that rate them is shit. The people that they rate is great. Right? So they keep saying the conversation is great. Everybody else who they've talked to saying the conversation is shit.
Okay.
What happens to their
Can we?
score?
It sounds like let's forget about score, but intuitive understanding of either membership or hostile.
Yeah.
Okay,
This
so
is that.
hostile being market, membership being gift, let's say. So okay, so you're just saying that you can tell if people are either on board with gift or market.
Yeah.
That's all that I'm hearing from you. So
No,
how
no,
does this help you to?
No, there's another element. Shunning. I was talking about shunning. What
But
happens?
why?
So, the person that is constantly rated negative by everybody that they interact with, they're not being shunned by the group. it's not like there's like, this person is bad, we're going to make a decision with a check mark to exclude them.
Okay.
What is happening
You're talking about immunity.
yeah, what is happening is that you have an ailment that keeps trying to
Yeah, yeah. So you're,
instill itself into the conversation, but none
so
of those
I
conversations
still don't,
work out.
I don't know why you've brought this up, but it is interesting, and you're talking about immunity within a community to understand which agents or service providers are on board with a gifting type economy. If they're saying, yeah, you can have food if you give me money, then you're fine. And you're like, dude, I'm starving. That's bullshit. That's what you're talking about. So this is definitely outside. That's for the trade guild to deal with. Fine. I'm talking within the guild. What are we doing here? We are collecting demand. And how does that work in a garden scenario? Right? Like, I get it that there's an outside. That's what you're pointing to. But how do we complete the thought here of today and show that the garden can be managed with the guild? The guild is based on a gift economy. How does that work?
So the garden has demands. Like, by being a garden. So,
Yes.
so you have a garden.
Yeah, yeah.
As a garden has demands.
Like water me. Sure.
You have water. You see that demand.
Yeah.
You go down to the garden and water it.
Right. So that's exactly. I think that this paradigm of demand advertisement is so unexpected to the market mindset that it's almost like invisible. But if demands are properly aggregated, properly put together in a system like through this dashboard app that we're talking about, then anybody who's like, I'm bored, well, there's a million different things out there that need to be done.
So you will see corporation convergence, state convergence, on whichever. In the ideal sense.
Onto demands.
Onto demands, yes.
Right.
So in the ideal world, where all of this model stuff is working, what would happen is that demand is advertised. Bunch of corporations in their existence are like, I can do parts of this. Several corporations formulate to just cover specific aspects of that for that time. Perhaps they might actually be useful for something else. We don't know that yet.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe. Don't worry about it. Do that. All of a sudden another demand comes up. And wait a minute. We can reuse everything we just set up to facilitate this new, very niche demand.
Right. And so we're talking about a different type of corporation. We're talking about a model corporation.
Mm-hmm. Nothing that exists permanently, but more like responsive. So when you have a demand, you will have a responding corporation forming to satisfy it. It could be just restructuring existing corporations. It could be creating something new. It could be some kind of combination of the two. It doesn't fucking matter.
I have a feeling like there would exist within the guild, the model, something that you could call like a shell corporation, which is like the shell or a husk of something
institute. The institute acts as like the shell.
I mean, like a bunch of people who know how to get something done,
Yep.
and they just only meta exist as a corporation until it needs to be spun up.
That still fits.
I don't know if that's institution though.
No, that is institution. That's what institution is supposed to look like. Really shifty.
But institution is supposed to collect demand. Corporation is supposed to supply it.
So the way we turn the normal thinking on its head is that the institute is actually more comprised of members than any other kind of mastery. So if we were to look at it on a grade of skill, like skill level, you have
corporation being the able body, the institute being the disabled body asking for the service. So the institute gives up its ability to do anything. The corporation does everything. Not the market corporation, but the collective grouping of people corporation, which is shifty. It shifts from context to context to context to context.
Right.
The responsibility of the institute that is quote unquote above that is to bring the underlying members' demands into its operational plate.
Now,
So-
you just associated membership with institution. Were
So-
you associating mastery with corporation?
No, master is with the institution. So
I thought you
yeah,
said membership.
if
just
you
now, though.
let's look at it as three layered situation. So top layer, bottom layer, middle layer. The top layer is supposed to collect demands only. It doesn't have its own agenda. Do you see what I'm saying there?
Well,
So-
as
so-
I
so-
understood
no,
it,
the overarching institutional's job isn't to direct where corporations do or why they do. It's not the mythology. The mythology is brought from underneath the corporations.
the demand is the way that I was thinking of it was that demand is actually a higher skill, in that to formulate the demand, to be able to reach down to the guest, if you will,
No, you're right.
and formulate the top to bottom stack in a demand that's something a member could hold on to and say, okay, I know this is right because a master just has put this together. I see the work to be done and I can do that.
So, here's what I'm saying. The capable layer, the one that does all of the actions, is completely neutered. And it's neutered by not being the one that drive what gets done. The way that happens is that a layer above it, the state, the institution, is an isomorphism for the layer below it. A complete structure of demand. So the only job up here is to reflect something underneath the thing that does the job.
In a word, to represent the people.
So it's like taking the top and making it wallow up from the bottom instead. That's the strange loop situation. That's what Jeb is about. That's the mental structure that is very difficult to adopt into by saying your top needs to be the same thing as the bottom so that the middle is isomorphic, a map between the two. In our model speak, it means mythology on the top has to reflect the artifacts on the bottom so that the memetics that come out of it are resonant of the isomorphism. To turn myth right back to model.
Yeah, so it's again the mastery, I guess, we're associating with state up top, pulling down, reflecting what's below, pulling it up into a way that can be then pushed down onto the middle.
And so that the middle is constrained then by the natural guilds, by the primordial archetypes, all of that.
And this is in line with classic coherence dynamics, if you will, of the model.
So top, narrative, bottom, abstraction, and in between we have concrete sandwiched. So our narrative has to bring into the abstract something that can wallow up through the concrete to be tangible. We have a mythology that reaches into our APS, shapes it as such that the concrete ongoing interaction of the spectacle is isomorphic. That's the picture. Quote unquote enlightenment. So you got these three. One of these layers is above the horizon, to be honest. And the entire thing is encompassed by mimetics. So the mimplex is the thing that has to be literally fixed to move narratives from their abstractions into the into actual mimetics, into presenting the real picture of the spectacle to the one person experiencing it at that time. All of that has to work together. Isomorphically, that isomorphism is what I keep referring to as maturity. Level of maturity I can't even begin to touch myself, but I can see it. Like, what the fuck else do we have to do with our lives if not that kind of maturity? What else to grow into? There doesn't seem to be a different element to really needing maturity into. Like, maturity could be confined to that. Jesus, did I drink all my beer already? Fuck.
Damn. I got you. I got you. Taking breaks times. Alrighty then, we'll be right back. Thinking. Oh yes, the roadblock there.
Yep.
So what we kind of like crossed and mixed a few things there, but so in terms of let's say a guest or whatever saying I'm hungry, a master formulating that into a proper demand, a member being able to take that demand and execute on it. How do we relate that with that example? What's the narrative there? Is the narrative the demand creation in form of a narrative? Like, why did you go to narrative there?
Yeah. So narrative forms the state of demand.
It's like a story. Like this person is hungry. They need something. If you give them food, their demand will be satisfied. That's like the high level narrative.
So narrative in this case is like hungry people starve to death. Therefore, it's important to provide food for hungry people. Blah 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 blah. Like what hunger is, the mythology of hunger, right? So when somebody comes up to that narrative and says, I'm hungry, the myth already handles what needs to happen. You feed the hungry person, for example. All of that lives in a narrative form. Right?
Yeah.
So mythology about eating, mythology
Sure.
about satiating a hunger is in the mythology state. It presents itself as narratives.
Right. Like,
And the narrative
because
is,
we
is that
under
if you're a hungry person there, give them food over here.
right. That's the story of hunger, is that the body needs to be sustained, and people feel this hunger, and then they demand that they be fed somehow. Either.
And this is what you do with hungry people.
Right. So you're so the job of a master in this case would be, or the state, the institution, to set up the mythology for that group, for the guild, for whatever guild, that when demands come in, they may hit and check off a bunch of mythologies.
Yeah. So, in another sense, the master is also there to basically thwart unrelatable demands. So if the demand is like, this person cheated on me, and I demand their life to be taken away from them because of some kind of property situation that they have wronged me at, what do you think the guild's going to respond with?
The gardening guild.
Just in general, like
What the fuck?
no, just in general, like demands could be like on dysmorphic to the guild
Okay.
themselves. So we're talking about like somebody crossed me. I demand that they be punished. That sort of situation.
Right.
How does the guild does not deal with this the same way?
So you're talking guild like capital G, kind of a bigger, overarching.
The guild's responsibility in that case is basically not to satisfy demands that don't make sense.
Right.
So, in other words, if a demand that does not make sense is made to the guild, there's another demand that says it has to make sense of the guild. There's no massaging around this. There's no like working around the guild, so to speak. Because any one demand is actually counteracted by any other
But
demand of
I
the
think-
guild being what it is.
Like, that's a good point, but I think it's almost feels like a tangent, because
Oh, it is.
it seems like we've almost wrapped up this idea of how do we actually set up this this system for that garden property, garden land gets used by the guild.
So, we've talked a lot about how it can't go. We didn't really get into how it has to go. You know what I mean? Like, all of the little points that were raised were about more like, yeah, it's not going to work that way, it's not going to work this way, it's not going to work this other way. Those are not the ways to actually make it function.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking like, first off, if land is quote unquote gifted, I don't know if there would be a contract or something like that, if that's even possible within the legal framework, but gifted for a certain amount of time, the guild may look at that and say, okay, this is not fertile. However, something can be built on here that would be very useful to the community, like
A house.
either a house or maybe like a communal like tool shed or something like that, a tool share, a library.
Yeah,
Whatever.
anything that a corporation could be potentially in charge of, and whether that corporation is the same from day in to day out, that's not relevant. There's always an overarching ownership from trades guilds perspective that is overlooking. So that's a way to present a face to the outside
Mhm.
world while also maintaining the same structure internally.
So like, I'm just wondering, I'm imagining and thinking how this works. Like, with the institution, you're compiling and demanding all kinds of demand from which is generally spatially relevant, like contextually spatially relevant, how close people are. So if a piece of land is in a neighborhood, it doesn't really make a lot of sense that in this neighborhood it's satisfying demand that's like 10 miles away or something, right? Maybe it does, but in most likelihood the people interested in this are going to
Are
be
right there.
close
Already
to it,
there, yeah.
right? It's because they can utilize that land much more efficiently than some people way far away.
Well, it's gonna give them a more immediate utility of that space.
Right. Not just a more abstract type of thing.
No, it's
space.
practically proven. You're closer to the fucking location. You can get the prime and
Right.
the best out
So
of it.
then what I'm wondering is where in our application are we aggregating demand, and how are we're obviously need to be sorting it by like distance sort of thing. Like, if a resource comes up,
So
how do we use that resource, right?
so yeah, like this is exactly what I had in mind for this conversation. Like, what I wanted to do, I'm on my phone by the way. And it's off.
There it is.
What I'm trying to do is try to illustrate a point. Is we need to start look at the garden, and we are now in this device space where our thumb, for example, is in control of that communication, right? And this is a great segue into the app, because what I'm trying to like to do get across here is like that question that you're asking, right? What does it look like if I'm sitting like this with my phone, right, with my thumb navigating this device? So I have my tricorder. What do they call them in Star Trek?
Yeah, tricorder. So what it looks like
What
is...
does the tricorder give me? Why is it giving me those things versus anything else? So, in our conversation, we're talking garden. We have a list of gardeners. We're in a lobby for gardening. We have a way to go into and communicate necessary tools. We have a way to communicate through this app necessary activity
We skipped a step.
for gardens.
We skipped a step.
Which
So when somebody who owns land wants to set it aside for the guild, essentially gift it to the guild's use for whatever, say, a year term, when that happens, let's say a notification pops up to everyone within a radius and it's a demand for the institution to designate this as a zone of particular use. Maybe it's going to be a garden, maybe it's going to be a generic tool area, maybe a library. We don't know. So that demand pops up, and within your interface, you've got like people are just piling in like their opinion, right, or what?
So, in this situation, demands come first.
Right. So
I need this. I need that.
Okay. So the institution. It's not that a bunch of opinions come in. The institution has already knows.
I'm on the hook for.
Within a radius of that area, the vast majority of these people are actually need food more than anything else.
Yeah.
So let's just say that by default, because we don't in this area we don't have the correct ratio of garden guilds. We have too many of this other type of guild, too many of this.
So in the instance that land becomes available to the guild in that locality,
It's already known basically that it's
what
gonna
the
be
demands are, yeah.
Right.
Demands precede that.
right. And this is a point that we keep bringing up. That demand is your context. It's primary and it's obvious. You don't need to vote on it. It's already known what the community needs, what the guild needs, right?
To really drive that point in, you don't get to vote on when you're hungry. You don't get to vote on when you need to take a shit.
Mm-hmm.
There's no voting
It
here.
should be a matter of a simple statistics sort of thing as to what's the least supplied demand right now.
Statistics also skew. Because,
Of course.
because in a localization,
I know every
in a
statistic
localized
has a
area,
localization, has
the statistics is actually going to be different.
it's a matter of where do you draw your lines and kind of that kind of stuff. What's inside, what's outside of your domain.
Which points to another element that is impossible to achieve with the current market system. You can't lay the blame of a single day's occurrence on that day. What I mean is, whatever happens in a single period of time is a shit show in general.
Right.
What that means is that whatever fucking plans you had need to be adjusted moment by moment because of that shit show.
Yeah.
In other words, the demand side, as soon as anything shifts in it, will be different as a result.
Mm-hmm.
So you have your demand side coming at you. You solve one of its problems, but that one problem solution actually solves this problem, that problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, because abstractly they're the same problem. This situation happens all the time. How do you consolidate that the next moment? Because your description of the world now needs to be different. It needs to account for all the resolutions, non-resolutions, blockers, whatever the fuck it is. Wherever the fuck that lands at, moment by moment. Right? Like, it's the moment that really counts for everything put in back. It's disintegration and reconstitution put back together every single time. You break it apart into its constituent parts, then you put it back together to give you the next output. Break it apart, give it output. That's what moments are. Right? Like in our diagrams, for example, where they're taking apart the situation into its momentary state. That momentary state drives the next momentary state, and the next time we hit the moment, that's where it comes from.
I'm imagining like this scenario where gardens are underrepresented, or mini farms are underrepresented and the demand for food is high in a certain area. Land comes up, and it's like, okay, well that should be, maybe garden. But at that same instance, maybe I'm not really sure. I'm just kind of imagining like maybe storage. Maybe there's a great need for like 1 week for the storage. Some like a bunch of technology to help equipment to do something else, and that gets used for that week just to do that. And then after that, then it goes to gardening. You know what I mean? Like maybe something comes up where that, there's needs to be a festival or something on some plot or something, or like I don't know. You know what I mean? Like in the moment, like something that maybe even more beneficial can just push the gardening process back a week or something. Like in context. I don't know. What's your scenario? Why do you think that
In my scenario, there's just a garden.
it's a piece of land.
Yeah, and the
It
garden
hasn't been decided.
And the garden needs this. It needs that.
No, it's
And
grass. It's grass.
Right, and then you have you or me or anybody else do something, and it evolves. It's like this today. By evolve, I mean you take care of the garden. Today it's like this, but because of your actions, it becomes like that.
But
So if you planted seeds, well, you get fruit.
no, I know I get that. That's assuming, okay, it's a very simple, this is going to be a garden, now it's going to progress. What if before the decision is made it's going to be a garden, there's a bunch of things, and maybe for most of the time it should have been a garden, but today there's some big thing happening in town, and just for one day we just need it for this instead of to be a garden. It can be a garden tomorrow, right? That's a context switch, which is out of the ordinary, which just happened today, moment to moment. Is that what you're talking about? Give me another example.
So, okay. In this case, we're not looking at the garden as a product that is meant for, say, strictly nutritional value or any of those things. At this point, we're talking about show. We're displaying the garden. If that's the motive behind it, then the work that's behind it, it's going to reflect that. So,
Sure.
so if the garden is set up for show, it's not going to be set up for
Food.
food. Yeah.
Okay.
And if that is allowable under the circumstances, it means that there's enough to both do show and feed. But if there isn't enough, you pretty much can guarantee where the guild will fall on this question.
Yeah.
It's not going to be about the show.
But that
Because
yeah.
representation is never perfect and always contradictory.
Okay. You were coming up with the scenario where like, oh, every day is moment to moment different and anything can happen and then it becomes this or that. Like that's
Yeah, which is the actual reality of the world. There's nothing is fucking lasting out there like that isn't like that.
hmm But then you didn't give an example of that happening. Like let's say it should have been a food normally, but then
Oh, no. With
something
the
else
garden
comes up.
example is actually a great example. It's like, do you utilize it for show or do you utilize it for feeding people? And all of a sudden, in the guild framework, it's like, what the hell is the show for? Like,
Okay.
what purpose
So,
does that serve?
I just don't know why you said moment to moment things can shift. If obviously hunger never shifts, we always need food, so therefore it's going to be a food garden. Boom, there's no complexity. I don't know what you're talking about shifting about.
In the shifting part, I'm talking about where you can come from a situation where you don't need the garden that you're even creating
For food?
for food. Like
Well,
it's
obviously,
all
yeah.
show. It's all show. You just feed yourself another way.
Or you can put trailers on or tents or something, whatever. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. So really, it's more like having a disconnect, a systemic disconnect of like what the garden is for. One is to make profit, which is disconnected from what the function of the garden is, and one is to feed people. Why are you growing fruit? Why are you putting so much energy into this, that, the other thing, if none of that energy can actually be reabsorbed?
So
Like,
it
it's
seems
this
like
weird disbalance of like outputting a source of energy to like do nothing. It's the same idea of accumulating wealth. It's the same idea as of like you're just like holding up the very operation of the thing that is supposed to like feed.
yeah, I get it.
Like what the
This is
actual fuck?
it's the parallel economy. You
actually-
already ran out.
Wow.
Chug master.
Wow.
I think it might be the last one. Oh, and so it be.
One?
Yep.
My last one?
So you're gonna be all right on the drive. I know you're a passenger, but I still ask that.
Do you think I'll drive you the wrong way?
Based on past experiences.
I threw up once in your car. And will you never forgive
Did
me?
you, or you? I thought you held it in.
No, we were heading out of here, and
Yeah, you didn't throw up that time. You threw up in your mouth.
yes,
Then you had to
own
had
it.
to
I had to own it.
re-own it.
I was very embarrassed for
Yeah.
not holding it in.
So,
But I made it
anyways,
through.
so this is good. It seems like our application needs to power the institution, as we've called it,
Mhm.
and the institution is
That seems like it
collector-
has to.
collector of demands. Well, it does both. It has to do both sides, right? The corporation, all that. But this is a big task, is even understanding what's being demanded.
It has a very convoluted setup for the current mental framework that people have. It's like you take your broadcast engine, you take your chat engine, and you're trying to say like, this is not that. My train of thought over here does not belong to this train over there. All of that kind of stuff. That's what this current system is allowing for. What we're trying to do is reverse that situation and saying like, no, you're speaking to other people, right? Like, own that responsibility. You are a speaker in the world. What you say matters. You're the very, very effectuator of what happens next. Like, that's whenever you choose to speak and interact, it goes into it. It goes into the ether. So it's not about it's not a privacy app. It's not a merit-based app. It's like your interaction with your space around you is fed back right into you. So if you're an asshole, for example, that's going to be reflected. It's as simple as that. I get where the apprehensions are, but you probably already know what all of my answers will be.
I don't know. I'm thinking about what the interface for the institution looks like, and what a family, for example, having weekly needs. Like, let's say a family has weekly needs. I need this many diapers.
So you're talking about
I need
this situation.
this many potatoes. I need this many whatever.
Is it this situation? Like you're trying to, like, figure out what to do with this interface?
Well, what it would look like, yeah, that's one way to. That's the most concrete way of like.
So you
Setting
can
it up.
you can imagine a lot of people will end up in the same concrete guilds, feeding, expanding, whatever.
Right, but their demands will be different because some families don't like turnips or whatever. They just won't buy
Did-
them. They don't want them.
Do they need to know about which exact network they're speaking to? Do they need to know? You know what I mean? Like,
No.
what I'm trying to describe is that they can find themselves in an arbitrary guild that helps them in their situation, that isn't necessarily like
Well, it's going to be people connecting to people, though.
yeah.
You will know who's helping you, probably.
My point was more like you wouldn't land yourself into a group that unnecessarily restricts you from doing something that you need to do for survival. So, the whole vegan movement, for example.
Now, are you talking about the idea of joining like a what do we call it? A network, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Like a specific church network, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you're advertising your family demands. Like, say, per week you need however many pounds of potatoes, this many pounds of rice, or whatever. Ideally, that would be a kind of thing. You would set up a list of, this is what my family consumes. I'm the one providing most of it, but if anybody could ever help me out and give any of this, I'll gladly take it.
Absolutely.
That's kind of, this is the transition, right?
Absolutely. What do you think gifts are?
Well, that's what we're talking about. This is the other.
This is the mental fucking jump that we need to make.
Right, but we've never talked
People
about this.
actually giving the thing without the expectation to
Right.
be paid back or
Right,
anything.
but people are willing to give lots of stuff. Do people need lots of stuff? That's a question. You can't just give. It's impossible to give without knowing what somebody needs.
All right, I'll comment. Nobody needs anything that Bill Gates has given. Literally. There is not a single soul on this planet that
What about
needs
the vaccines?
those can be done without Bill Gates.
Okay, fine.
Like, those should have been done without Bill Gates at all. If the vaccines are what they are for,
You mean if they're actually meant to help people, or whatever types?
then Bill Gates is like a non-player in the entire scenario
It shouldn't be a corporate for-profit venture.
whatsoever.
hmm So again, I'm trying to imagine what this interface looks like by
Okay.
giving this scenario of a family putting together a list of the items that they will accept on a weekly basis that they need. They're providing it themselves. However, if they get any of that, they will have to spend less money through the market, right? And this is how you transition. We all need to do this individually.
You know what's
and
funny?
this is what the app is aggregating.
You know
for
what's
us.
funny? That the aggregation of demands doesn't actually have very unique qualifications.
Except for what types of
No.
produce people
What
like.
I mean is that demand lands in very, very, very specific few categories. Like you don't jump really out of those. a place to sleep, some food to eat, and a place to shit. Like those like I keep bringing it shitting, but what I'm trying to get at is how stable some of those things are.
Yeah.
They don't change over time. Like
Right.
they really
Yeah,
don't.
And the fact that all the things that we do end up buying or demanding
Are besides that.
by and large are extras which change on a whim. Oh, Apple is cool one day and then Google is cool the next or something.
Which is why I'm still on Android.
There you go. So I guess we'll be back in a bit here. We got about another half hour left to go, so we'll hopefully be able to wrap up on our app ideas here for today. And we shall be back to look over the screens. We are back. Yeah. So yeah, just thinking about demand and what it looks like from the perspective of the individual, as a say a leader of a family, to be able to just punch in on their app, like select a bunch of things that
Oh shit, the leader of a family is an ego map that we have.
per week. Sure. Yeah, but you typically have a representative. Of course, we would think, okay, everybody could have their own inputs of what I want, what I demand. That's totally fine too. But I'm thinking in terms of like children who can't even hold a phone yet, right?
Okay. Well, you know what? Children's demands are actually satisfied extremely simply. And the model really helps with that. What do children need? To
Go to outer space.
eat.
Oh.
You've never fed a child, I guess.
Thought they want to be astronauts. Okay, anyways.
My point is very simple. When you're a family person,
Oh, they
Such
want to
as
be
myself.
YouTubers. They need YouTube.
they can want whatever the fuck they want, but they have very specific demands. How do you allow children to survive your existence?
Right.
Like in broad
And this
strokes.
is a great point. What you brought up about there being very specific, virtually unchanging demands, like
Yeah.
daily demands
Yeah.
of everybody, which don't change, and
Which
that
we know.
and that's such a small and easily like world solvable. Like as far as the resources we have, we can solve it probably 100,000 times over.
It's not the issue.
Right. So
It's literally not the issue. Look,
yeah, but
feeding
as a
feeding mouths
as
is
a
not the issue.
as a
Getting that food to said mouths,
as a
that's the issue.
kind of like killer app, if you will, of our platform is like just getting the basic needs met, which is energetically completely viable like thousands of times over the world over.
Right, given the
Right.
observations.
So if we can just organize it properly, then it's not even an issue, and then you have people not dying of hunger, right?
as an arbitrary reason for dying,
Right. Yeah.
which is like a weird reason for anybody to be dying in a world full of
So, like,
fucking food.
So you've got this. So the
God
this
damn it, it's
parallel,
full of food. The world
parallel,
is full of food.
the parallel economy begins with the most basic and constantly recurring demands. That's it, right?
You have to eat,
and then
you
it,
have to
it can
shit.
expand from there, right? But what we should be kind of focusing on is that these problems can be solved very easily, very simply, if you have the right structure in place in which you have a way of collecting demands
I'll give you one better.
and a way of supplying it.
Some of these problems should not be problems. Period.
Yeah, well, you've got like if you look at many African countries where you've had companies come
Africa
in,
is wealthy
companies
as fuck.
come in and say, "Oh yes, we will help you to do your farming." Meanwhile, guess where all the agriculture goes? Gone. Boom, out of the country. And the people who need it right there,
Africa's
do they
a
get it? No.
really fucked up situation because literally Africa can support itself and the world several times over. But the way it's being used
Of course, yeah.
right now
Obviously, yeah.
makes it impossible
Goes without saying. So what about
for
screens?
Africans.
So screens, yes, we know. We don't have to get bogged.
It's a very different conversation, but
We're gonna
yeah.
get bogged down.
Ugh.
It's obvious, and yeah. If we don't need to focus on the solving all demands.
We don't even need to focus on much at all because most of the problems that we're talking about have a solution. What we need to do in our mindset collectively is accept those solutions, which isn't what's happening. So,
But
ideally,
this
we
is
would
about
recognize the fact that Africa is self-sufficient. We would recognize
Obviously, yeah,
that
right.
it doesn't need our help.
so
we would recognize that
we would all we would need to do is empower activist thinking minds with the proper tools,
yeah,
and that's what we're
all
talking
we
about.
would really need.
We're talking about
Yeah.
developing here, right? So
Because-
you wanted to talk about screens. Did you want to go over what I laid out, or did you want to expand on that, or did you
All
want
right,
to get into a specific part of it?
Let's do it. Let's do it. No, let's do it.
Okay.
I actually want to get right into it, and
Because we have about half an hour left, so
I'd
at
like
least
to-
we can preview this.
I'd like to set it up such that we're coming into this with a very specific set of assumptions.
Okay.
And that specific set of assumptions is about the conversation and broadcast specifically. And beyond that, it's about how schemas and process shape that. So, the given is broadcast and conversation. The non-given is how these are shaped. How do you shape a broadcast or a conversation to, I don't know, implement a class using code? Right? You see what I mean?
No.
So,
I was busy. So we've got our screens here. This is a document I created with a bunch of layouts, essentially. What do you call this type of design? I guess
wireframe.
we're doing wireframe for an application, a social media application called the dashboard. And these are various screens that should appear in their most basic form.
Yeah, without thinking about the exact controls or
Yeah.
like we're not trying to implement the exact user interface. We're just talking about like
The elements need to be present.
Yeah.
Here's as far as
here's how I like to keep looking at it, and I keep doing this as a thing. Is you're like this, right? This is what you're
Yes.
doing. What is it? What does this?
can people see what you're doing there?
I don't know. What does
Just lift it up a bit. Maybe.
what? How can we translate this?
The moving of the
kind-
thumb on the yeah.
How can we translate this to something useful
So we've started
in
with
a way that doesn't interfere with the way you do things?
we've started with the idea of developing the cell phone first as being the smallest screen, and kind of the most constrained. So all you can usually do is swipe left or right to pull up other virtual screens from the other side. Maybe a menu if you swipe one way, and then in your center screen, your main screen, you're able to scroll typically to find oldest stuff as you scroll past.
So-
and then maybe at the very bottom of your phone there's 4 buttons or something that do something. So that's what we're dealing with. That's what we've tried to lay out here, and we've basically begun with entering I call it a domain. Say your church domain. It's kind of like networky technology terminology.
Well, anytime you do that, anytime you do something like that,
Yeah.
you are setting yourself up to connect with what's called a proximity guild. A guild that is out there on the network.
Right. An actual group of people, in other
Yeah.
words. A
They've
collection.
decided to be a group of people.
Right. So we're assuming that you've downloaded this app on their direction, maybe even from their website, and the app has come probably preloaded where you can just press this button, connect to your church or to your
Right. So
recreation center
wherever
or-
the source of the app is, you can assume a guild, an overarching guild, actually exists to mediate.
typically. Now, normally what would happen in with today's technology is you would download this app from us or off of the official, say, Apple store.
And that's the only mediator.
And you wouldn't see the church information or the say rec center information until you point or search for that. Would be one of the first things you do. The first window that comes up is you need to connect to your community, right? So you search for my church Barry or whatever, and there's a list comes up, and then you pick, oh, that one's mine, and then you start interacting with the app. So just to show here, we've got it tells you the domains. This is your domain selection, the default domain name, which you can tap and enter, or tap to enter it.
So you're
So
so
we're just
describing
laying-
that as a positive.
We're
not
laying
as a
out
negative.
we're laying out the program itself. You have a
I was actually more confused with whether you showed that as a positive or a negative.
I wasn't commenting on that. I'm just trying to show that this is what we are, how we're setting it up, the first screen. So the first screen you're hit with is connect with your people.
Yeah.
Whoever invited you to use this app, that's probably where you should go first.
So it's speaking to the network. So
Yeah.
for example, the only reason that somebody else was able to point you to this app to begin with is because they're already in the network. So they're only able to pull you back into it. Right? At the same time, it's kind of like it's a meta structure. You can't have a legitimate network without that to begin with. So it's like you're on the hook. Right? The entire holistic element of this does not work
Right.
unless
Yeah.
you have okay, we've bootstrapped a dashboard. Now we need to bootstrap an agent back into the dashboard to interact with it. So that secondary step, it's like a way in a rite of passage in a sense.
You're connecting people to a commonality of protocols.
Yeah, like, okay, do we really want to connect you? How does that work? That's when an agency becomes a dashboard. That legitimacy, if you will, of agency it's also its own legitimacy to broadcast. I broadcast on said dashboard.
Right?
If you signed up for my garbage, that's what you get.
No, there will be probably networks which can be accessed anonymously and that kind of stuff, but
Yeah,
to start with,
it goes together.
we're talking about the probably typical scenario where you're using this for a community purpose, and not just anybody can get into that community, but because you are actually local to those people, that building, wherever it is, whatever it is, you've been invited, you have an invitation. Therefore, you have an invitation at a certain level. Are you just kind of a guest, or have you been invited to actually facilitate certain things and have permissions?
So you know how an ID token has an authentication element to it?
Sure.
Most identification strategies revolve around
Yeah.
what the identity is. If that identity has permissions for this, that, and that, that's authorization.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's an exclusionary system. What we want to do is have role-in identities get themselves up into the authorization, like that's the real breakaway from the system. How do you move from authentication to authorization without shunning? Coherence. So coherence stands in the way of, like, there's your running identity.
Yeah, I get what you're talking about. You're talking about the problem of gatekeeping. Well, you can't be a teacher here because we don't know you.
But how about you can't be a teacher here because you're fucking retarded? What you're teaching is retarded. like you can't turn it around. It's just slowed down,
So,
inconceptual
here's-
mass of shit.
I think what we're running into here is a problem of transition, once again. So we need to acknowledge that existing structures have their own organization, their own responsibilities, and they need to have certain reign on things.
They're not necessarily translatable. They may be in the very need of heavy modification.
So my thought there is, the word transition is helpful. because if you have an existing corporation that can allow people in provisionally, over time it will become more open, I believe. Once you have this sort of
in the guild framework, yeah.
When you have the
In
framework
system,
instantiated,
in the system framework, the opposite.
when you have this coherence type of scoring going on, then you're golden, right? You've got people, you can kind of verify mastery in a sort of pseudo sense.
And to understand coherence a little bit better, what we're really trying to like get to is like every time you speak, are you speaking to people or are you speaking to yourself? Right? Like you can hold a conversation, sure, no problem, but what that conversation is about, that's what you should not have a say on.
This is probably too deep for the first screen.
It's deep for the first screen, but it really is relevant to what coherence winds up being. So, the one thing that this app really asks of its users is that whenever you interact with anything whatsoever, is to give it like that coherence score. That's the tall ask. Because the point is that the longer you use the app, the less you deal with incoherent things. So, ideally, that means that the bad players in any of those interactions are going to talk themselves out of relevance.
I get it, but I think that this is can be seen as like an add-on that we should tackle after we have the basics.
Can't. That's like literally one of the defining features that sets it apart from any other social media platform out there. Coherence. And I apologize for this. This is what the AI told me.
Therefore, it's the gospel truth.
No, it's not the gospel.
No, I get it.
But
I'm just bugging.
What it means is that it has never been attempted.
I get
that way. Like it's entirely enabled to. How I know what I know that this is a good idea is that the AI
it's a good
not
idea.
capable of extrapolating the end result anymore.
I know it's a good idea.
I drove it to its fucking end.
I also know that this depends on web of trust technology. So, in other words, you need like encrypted authentication.
It needs the kind of trust that you and I have between each other as people.
You need decentralized identity.
You're your own person. You judge me based on what I say. I am my own person. I based you based on what you say. It needs that autonomy. It can't have you being a puppet to a system and me being a puppet to a system just discussing the system.
Okay.
It
Let
literally
me throw
needs
a
that.
little wrench in your works.
Okay.
If you're a guest, coherence-wise, you don't, or a participant even, you can't coherently judge the coherence of others. Therefore, you
That's fair.
must rely on what other people say about people in the community. Therefore, you have a third-party hop that's going through to say, I trust what that guy says about him, because and there's a chain.
That is the leap between
There's a chain.
guest.
There's a chain of information.
So
there.
that trust is the leap between pure guest, who does not know anything about the overall Arcane model, and the participant, who still does
Now
not
listen-
know
listen to
anything
this.
about the
Listen to
overarching
this.
model.
Somebody who who says, like, let's say a master says, "Oh, this guy is great." You just received a tokens from this person that says, "Oh, this master which you trust, he says I'm great." Meanwhile, it was forged. You need to guard against that. And this that's what I'm talking about, the web of trust. This technology, we can't do that. I mean, it's there. It's been solved.
Okay.
We can't focus on that before we even get this structure done.
I do have a quasi resolution. It's not a resolution, but a quasi one. The model effectively really demands awareness of that scenario. It stems from the incompleteness in contradictory theorems that Gödel sets out into representation to begin with. Which means you cannot run a model whatsoever that is both free of contradiction and explains everything at the same time. That awareness, it is being locked into that impossibility that can drive anybody out of the worldview that this is how it has to be. Because representation cannot, will not, never is capable of actually capturing perfection. That mindset itself, when you cannot relate to perfection in any capacity, is going to prevent you from falling for the trick. There is no representation that is all encompassing. It's not out there. It's mathematically impossible. Do not seek it. The seeking of it is fundamental error in conceptions.
So even if so let's say that this person did get a token from from a particular master saying, "Oh, I was coherent in this moment." It doesn't mean they are coherent. It means at that time, like there was a
coherent.
Okay, great. It doesn't mean that what's happening right now is coherent. I think that's what your point is.
Yeah.
Even this system,
The
even if
next
it's
moment will
cryptographically secured, the master has signed the token properly, and you have a proper signature chain coming back to yourself from multiple sources saying that yes, this token is valid. It doesn't mean
the environment changed entirely between this moment and that moment.
I get it. Okay.
What the fuck are you gonna do with that token now?
So this says that yes, your coherent scoring system can give you a gist of things, but it can't be the be all end all. There's still context. Anybody can change in a snap, in a moment. It can be different. Someone can be they can be threatened with their life unless they do something to you or something. You don't know what just happened a minute ago, right? So,
and if that happens to somebody outside of your influence, how in the fuck does that need to mean anything to you?
Yeah.
Right?
So that's why I want to just set the coherence scoring aside.
I'm just like...
And I want to work on the structure of the application itself. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like that's all. Your own point is proving that it's kind of an aside. It's helpful, but it's kind of an aside.
Yeah, and that's fine. I fucking live in the aside element of everything. That's how I think about it.
So where were we? Do we want to just walk through the screens here just to give our lovely viewers a tidbit kind of preview of what we've done with the screens?
Could it be possible in the context of like how abstract and concrete shouldn't really be different? Like,
okay,
let's use this as an entertainment of the almost correct way, and then try to use that to blend them together.
Give me 5 minutes to just scroll through this and explain it, because it probably wouldn't even take that long.
Yeah.
So this is the first try that I put together of this wireframe of these different screens that come up with our dashboard application.
Are we looking at a phone screen?
It should be
Ish?
it should be a phone screen.
Okay.
You
That makes sense in the context of what is being displayed.
You could imagine this being like more phone shaped or whatever if you want. That's not really important.
Well, it's an adaptive system, so.
Right. So this will be expanded out to desktop, to etc. Right. So the idea was the first time you open up the app, you've got, as I was explaining, a default domain name. Ideally, this would be who invited you, or it could be just the last domain that you joined. When you join to a domain, it's kind of giving you an ontology of the things that happen, of the worldview ontology of, we have,
It's Bootstrap.
let's say it's a church, they already have like administrative guilds, a childcare guild, this is our kind of favorite example.
You're not landing into like a dysfunctional
Or just zero.
application that
Nothing
has
there.
nothing about it.
There's nothing there.
There's something to do. Like you're dropped into conversations, you're dropped into broadcasts, you're dropped into
Yeah.
existing online systems.
Exactly. So you're joining into a living breathing organism, and at this first screen, you may have a list of other domains which you may have joined before, but it may not be your default, right? So you could join like your rec center. You could go there, check out what's happening, and interact
So
with
explore your network.
that. You have the ability to join a domain, to connect to a new domain. You have the ability to create a domain. From the very first window, you have the option of changing settings.
I think some of these can be condensed because when you're searching and joining, I think those can be like
Yeah. Well, this is the
one
first
interaction.
iteration. But yeah, you're right. I had envisioned the idea of a local domain being you're not even connecting on a network, you're just using your own application to sort yourself out and the things that you do, kind of like a personal to-do lists or task list, a personal organizer, if you
It
will.
should always be connected to a network. There's no dashboard that's outside of a network.
However, the application can be used to just iterate protocols
What I'm saying
offline, if
what
you
I'm-
wanted to, right?
What I'm also saying is that it sets up a situation where the bootstrap for any single dashboard can be localized. So it's not like you need to bootstrap your dashboard to be just the network or the mediation or the thing. You can assume that bootstrap and work off of it to bootstrap something else. So,
Okay, well,
in the case of a garden,
so you've
case
used
of-
up a minute now of my 5 minutes, and we're still on the first slide. So I'm just saying, I could just keep scrolling here for like a few minutes and just get it over with, if that's cool. If that's cool with you. Oh, I guess we'll take another little break. We is good? Okay, so we got like really a few minutes left. So since I put all this effort into putting together an application, I'll just scroll through the windows here very quickly.
let's make sure that I do not invalidate any of it. It's still
Okay,
on the board.
and this is it's a first attempt, right? And this is based on our discussion last time. I just went home and just did these windows, right? So the idea was you could tap and hold to view, just as an example, to view information about a domain. So what would be in there? The domain that you've selected.
Well,
Or wait,
what's a
oh,
domain?
I didn't
What's a
view it.
domain?
Oh, I didn't
If not, it's agents.
I didn't update this. So there would be just metadata about that. Okay, so let's continue on. So viewing the contents of a network.
Did I?
Yeah, that's. Oh, you just slammed her right back. So contents of a network. I envisioned this in two ways, which you were saying probably could be converged, but I still feel people will feel comfortable either doing concrete or abstract. So in the concrete, you've got a list of guilds. This would be like the Gardener Guild. You know, not every network has a Gardener's Guild, right? But a church might, right? So you're going to see Gardener's Guild, you're going to see Maintenance Guild, Sound Guild, Worship Guild.
I actually tried
In the-
to present it as like the Gardeners Guild dashboard. So what you're getting at as actually other users as other gardeners, other users as tool makers, other users
let's
as
go back to it.
space givers. So you land
Yep.
into your garden dashboard, and you're having people who are
So a list of guilds. What are you
Give-
saying? There's
give-
not a
give-
list
give-
of guilds, or
no agencies. You get a list of agencies, and that list of agencies could be an entire corporation, for example, that holds garden space.
An agent uses a dashboard.
So they can be part of the conversation in the gardening dashboard because they're providers of space for gardening. They're a whole agency, but
So you're saying
a
it's a
group of
list.
people.
It's not a list of guilds. In
It
the
is and
concrete.
no, I'm saying agents, dashboards, and guilds serve as the same representative entity in conversation. So you can have a whole guild or a whole dashboard being an agent in a conversation.
Yeah.
So
Um,
corporations that give garden space away
like
can be agents in garden conversations about where shit goes in
yeah.
gardening.
So like we're developing right now, and I don't think like I just wanted to give an overview. I guess if you want to go to the washroom, I'll just kind of mutter on. I'll just mutter on to myself here about what I was thinking, anyways, for how the app looks. You can see at the top here there's network and mediation. Those are the concrete and the abstract. So in the abstract you have a lot less kind of ad hoc things. So instead of a gardener's guild, you may have like technology guild and that kind of stuff, like with tools and stuff. But I feel like most people would be more comfortable seeing like, oh, there's a gardener's guild, and not just immediately breaking it down into all kinds of abstractions. It's like the gardener's guild. There's a collection of people there working towards something. They have certain plots that they're working with, certain tools and whatnot. So this would be another screen. Each window or each page here is another screen of the application. So here, my idea was we've now clicked at the very top. We have clicked on the mediation instead. So we're viewing the network, but we're viewing the mediation of the network. And here was just given an example under education. You have education about all of these different things. And so here's where you would find a lot of different, you'd be able to, I believe, drill down and look at different protocols of, what is education about, providing a model, and in which you can implement such a model in context and then observe feedback for that model, see if it works. That's how education is kind of working. That's generally how learning works and teaching works. You give a model, you try it out, The student tries it out, that kind of stuff. So that being the very basis of this entire stack, all of these other things are depending on that. And again, these are not in context because a gardener's guild would have education within it, but you would be able to give a model of the garden, and have that a person then be able to navigate the garden and see how well that model works. But again, this is on the abstraction side. So within the abstraction side, we have the natural guilds here. This is one of the fundamental guilds, being the natural guilds. And we have an option here at the bottom to look at the primordial archetypes, which is another of the abstractions. And again, this is not a concrete existing bunch of things, but we have the abstract structure of the corporation, or of a corporation and of the state. And they're different elements from, these are in reverse order as I had them. So starting with risk management at the bottom, value proposition, real estate, etc. for the corporation. And again, I believe you would be able to kind of drill into these and find protocols, much the same way you would look at this and say, education protocols are like provide a model, do feedback. That's a protocol, right?
We do have spreadsheets that link it back to the natural guilds.
Right. So within on the abstract side of things, you'd be able to look at primordial archetypes as well as the natural guilds. And within your network, you would be able to see what protocols have been filled out. What protocols does this network use? What do they go with as far as a structure? So
apologies for all the smoke.
It's all good. And then so that there's our primordial archetypes. Now we're moving on to a different screen altogether, viewing the lobby of a guild. So each one of these guilds has the ability to click into it and get a sort of landing page. The lobby of the guild can be viewed as a conversation or a broadcast.
Both, yeah.
So
the lobby feed is both. Always.
Right. Yes, but there's sort of different implications as to which way you're looking at it as. So a conversation being a much more ephemeral, ongoing thing, whereas the broadcast being something which has been set in stone, if you will. It becomes a thing.
It's what you overhear.
A thing, quote unquote.
Conversations are what you want to participate in.
So you have the ability to create a new conversation here. There's a button for that. You can search conversations because this conversation is bolded here. Right? So now there's a default conversation within that lobby. The default conversation is basically everything. Now you have a list of ongoing conversations. These are the ability to go into their into the different conversations that are ongoing right now. In the default, you see them all at once. And it's like it could be a complete spam, right?
Yep.
So you at this landing point of the lobby, you can choose to go into the default. You're going to get a fire hose. You're just going to you're drinking from the fire hose, or you have a list of current conversations, probably or sorted by most recent activity at the top. So maybe the most popular might be there. Even their recent activity might not.
That ordering could be arbitrary. Like maybe
right?
You can select your ordering.
You can choose how that gets sorted. So if you click on the broadcast side, you're seeing a different sort of setup, and we have channels. The default channel,
ongoing conversations.
Default channel is contains everything that's been broadcasted, created into a broadcast. Now we have you could say sub channels or just channels, which are not the default of that lobby, which are specific channels like I don't know.
For each broadcast.
The gardening lobby may have a tools like I need tools. So you have a channel just for looking for tools, right? And if you go to the default channel, you're going to get that and more, and everything else that's broadcasted, right? So this is why it's a different view. These channels are not. People aren't just talking into those. These are things that have been selected for broadcast. Okay, so now we're moving along. That's a different screen. And that's all I've got so far. So I managed to get
that's fucking
managed
perfect.
to get through it.
That's
Um,
fucking perfect.
So for a first attempt, what I don't have here yet is the view of what it looks like to be in a conversation and start selecting out pieces to put them into broadcast. I believe I don't think I have that yet.
You start a conversation. It's like starting a chat with somebody.
No, I've drawn it.
Those
I just haven't.
those like are solved problems. Is all I'm talking about. Like,
Yeah.
you don't need to like worry about what conversations look like. They look like chat fucking programs.
So thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
The biggest difference is that like these things are broadcast. Nobody that's outside of that field of view is not privy to the information. So we're not talking about a system of like talking to other people and having that hidden away somewhere, right? Like that's not the point of this entire framework. The entire
Yeah,
framework
see
is
our
like
last conversation
to
too.
avoid
Things getting lost.
thinking that way to begin with.
There is, whenever you go into a default channel and start talking, it gets filtered down and down through so many different pieces. We were talking about through the I guess through conventional guilds, and then through the natural guilds. Even it would be a conventional guild is composed of all kinds of, like a shotgun blast of natural guilds. So your comment just being in something that relies on a conventional guild means that it's going to get shotgun blasted even through to the entire network, right?
Yeah,
So it's
so-
going to appear in so many places.
So the way to think about it is that anything concrete in that network is actually an aggregate of another piece of that network, and due to that aggregation is that there's no. It's not a network that relies on anonymity or the kind of like
relies on what?
on not being anonymous.
Anonymity.
Anonymity.
Right. Okay.
So, without being that, it needs to like have a way to not necessarily punish you for having this dissented opinions or whatnot. Right? That's where the coherence score is really coming from. Is like you can't rely on one single dashboard giving you a coherence score. You
Yeah.
can't rely on yourself to give you a coherence score. You can't rely on.
Now, we do have this idea of a network, though, and those seem foundational. So let's say you're invited to a network, but you set up a script to spam the fuck out of every channel possible as fast as you can.
If your localized network continues to receive negative coherence scores, when you push that network as an agency onto any other network, that localized scoring is going to feed back into it.
With a web of trust.
Like,
If it
why
exists.
why the fuck are you getting so many negative scores, for example, if what you're saying is correct? So when you introduce that network into the thing, its scoring system is going to elevate. AKA, this conversation is coherent, this conversation is coherent, this conversation is coherent. And then you'll have dashboards that will be like constantly going, no, no, no. The problem now becomes not the individuals, but why are these dashboards scoring shit differently? What's this dashboard's overall score versus that one?
And typically it would be market. It's market
So
driven.
why is the lower scoring dashboard keeps elevating somebody? As it continues to do so, it drops. right? So if you tie your scores into any one dashboard, that's going to be picked up. Like, that's gaming the system. That's picked up by the overall scoring system.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting game theory, and of course, we're talking about defending against charlatanism.
Mm-hmm. Which is the primary defense.
But I wonder if we're about ready to wrap up.
Yeah, we should
because the ride's going to be here. We're going to be piecing out, and for now, I think it's been good. We managed to get through that, and
Did
here we are.
Did we do any screen stuff?
What do you mean? Like new screen stuff? No.
Do we have any new ideas about it? Like, if we were to like look at this phone and be like, this is what it should do.
Well, let me ask you this: if this was this list of screens that I've created were to be tweaked a little bit, maybe upgraded a bit, is it enough to start programming?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I know that I need to add a few screens. I have in mind, one of which was the chat screen, like to actually.
I think
chat.
we need to get rid of the division between abstract and concrete. Personally, I think that needs to be blended. In the same sense that you don't get concrete activity without some kind of abstraction, and you don't get abstraction without some kind of concrete activity.
I know that, but think about somebody who's joining a network, and they're going to be thinking they'll either be thinking, how does this network function? How does it work? In other words, they're thinking abstractly, or they'll be thinking,
but
what guilds exist? Who are the groups? What groups are happening here? I want to join a group.
The question I have is that
It's totally two different things.
Can they make that decision intuitively? So the question I have is that, can they intuitively separate the abstraction from the concreteness that represents the abstraction?
In the screen, you give two different options, so they can see the different sides of it.
Which is why I feel like
how do you do both at once?
Conversation and broadcast engines has to be the first things, in the sense that you don't have to think more about what you're doing. It's the fact that you're doing it. Like, you're putting in that information, it becomes part of that flow. That's where the isomorphism comes from.
How does the difference?
It just works in the same
when
way
you're
that
using,
life would.
When you're using the app, how does the difference between using and navigating a conversation and then flipping to a broadcast, how does that relationship inform you as to what's the difference between conventional guilds and natural guilds?
So this comes back to the example we had earlier on, with somebody taking a screenshot of their conversation at the time and using it as a broadcast on a forum medium to be like, hey, what do you people think about this?
It is a direct metaphorical or whatever parallel. Like, it is there. So
that's how it's handled.
It's like what you're saying is like, well, we shouldn't separate conversation and broadcast. That's what I'm hearing.
Not in the traditional sense.
So in whatever sense we do separate them, that's also what these guilds should be separated.
You have to treat conversations as broadcasts, and you have to treat broadcasts as informative pieces of the ongoing conversations. That's the only way that really helps. So what I'm saying is like
I get it, but I don't know how you put that.
If you have a conversation which ends up being a broadcasted post upon which anybody can comment, ideally what will happen is that some of the commentators will address the conversationalists and ask a direct question based on the messages that they've sent at the time in that conversation. that condenses into a question. Sure, that can then be later replied by a whole new conversation between one of the participants and the commentator. So
Yeah.
this movement back and forth,
Yeah, I know,
and
I know.
back and
Like I know that
forth.
that has to happen. That's the relationship we've been talking about since the start of everything, but of today, is that just because something becomes set in stone, quote unquote, it never is.
Initially, yeah, the
It's-
next comment is actually going to derail
The
that.
next iteration has to break it apart. Because in context, you're finding that context never matches what you thought. It was never a perfect abstraction. Never.
So you can have a conversation started about your conversation
Abstractions
due
must
to the
be
fact that the conversation existed.
abstractions must evolve as conversations.
So there's a passive element, which is the recorded spectrum broadcast, and the active element, which is
I'm
like
just thinking, like as a
innate-
teaching tool, these have to be separated as best as they can, but still integrate. I think like it has to be visually separate somehow. It can't be all just one blob. Like even if whether I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, this is where you come down to your phone, and you ask yourself questions like, how do I use this, whatever by whatever screen, to do this or that? So, how do I type a message into a conversation? How do I respond to a comment on a broadcast?
Yeah, I know.
How
So
do I blend the two?
we that's what we need to get into more. a little
Yeah,
bit.
that's our screen problem. Like, how do you like go into a broadcast, like a forum page, hit reply, but that reply doesn't mean I'm writing a comment, but it means I'm starting a full-blown conversation asking you to participate in it. Like, what's the difference there? How does this work differently on the phone? That's the UI. So it's not just like the thing, it's also
Yeah.
where does my thumb move?
Well, exactly. So if you go to that broadcast that you're talking about, you want to make either a comment or a full blown, like here, this is a statement that needs to be its own thing. That's what I'm talking about. If it's just a comment like "Great job," you're on the comment mode. If you want to be like, "Okay, I've got a serious issue that needs to be addressed about this," now you're in broadcast mode.
So you got to
Right.
choose your engine basically as soon
You have
as
to. You have to, because when you're typing in, it's coming out as either a comment or a
full-blown
broadcast.
invitation to converse
Yeah.
with me.
Right. So, anyways, with that, we'll get those sorted out hopefully within the next couple of weeks for the next meeting, number 70. Big 70. Mm-hmm. Not as giggity, but anyways, let's pack it up and peace out, homies. Boing.